Cole Briggs had been watching the rally for 9 days without once actually seeing it. That was the distinction nobody would have understood if he had tried to explain it, which he never would have because explaining things to people was not a habit Cole had developed in 14 years of moving through a world that had never once stopped to ask him what he thought. You watched or you got caught off guard. Those were the two options. Cole had learned which one kept you breathing sometime around his 11th birthday in a group home outside Tucson, where the night supervisor had a habit of walking the halls at 2 in the morning and where the boys who slept too deeply woke up missing things. He had been in Sturgis since the first Tuesday of August. He had arrived the way he arrived most places, carried by a combination of a Greyhound bus from Flagstaff and two separate hitchhiked rides from men who had not asked him a single question, which was the only kind of ride worth taking. He had 43 cents in the front pocket of his jeans. He had a gray hoodie that had started its life in a Phoenix donation bin and had been with him ever since. He had a paperback copy of Mice and Men with the cover torn off somewhere outside Tucson, the spine cracked in 3 places, the pages soft and slightly damp, from being carried in the waistband of his jeans during a rainstorm outside Flagstaff. He did not have a plan. That was not unusual. Cole had not operated from a plan since the last one had dissolved 14 months ago in a child services office in Phoenix, when a woman with reading glasses, pushed too low on her nose, had told him that his current placement at Desert Sun Group Home was being extended indefinitely due to a paperwork issue that she could not go into detail about. Cole had sat in that chair and looked at the woman and understood in the particular way that children who have been processed through enough systems understand things, which is to say, without surprise and without any of the emotion that surprise requires, that the paperwork issue was not a paperwork issue. Something else was happening. He did not know what, but the shape of it, the particular blankness behind the woman's eyes when she said the word indefinitely, had told him that whatever it was not going to resolve itself in a direction that was good for Cole Briggs. 3 weeks later, a man had shown up at Desert Sun on a Tuesday afternoon and signed the visitor log under the name R. Cole and told the front desk he was there for a tutoring session. Cole had been sitting in the common room pretending to read when the man walked in. He watched him the way he watched everyone from the side without appearing to look. The man was somewhere in his early 40s, with gray coming in at the temples that had not been there long enough to reach the rest of his hair. He moved through the common room the way people move through rooms when they have walked into difficult rooms for a long time and stopped being intimidated by what those rooms contained. He sat down across from Cole and put a paperback on the table between them. Of Mice and Men, brand new, cover intact. The man said, quietly and without preamble, "I know your father." Cole had looked at the table for a long moment. Then he had looked up. He said, "I do not have a father." The man said, "I know you believe that." He paused. "My name is Hank. We have a lot of ground to cover and not much time to cover it in, so I need you to listen carefully and ask your questions after, not during." Cole had listened. What Hank Mercer told him over the following 11 months, every Tuesday and Thursday, without exception in the tutoring room of Desert Sun Group Home in Phoenix, Arizona, was not the kind of thing that could be summarized in a single conversation or absorbed in any comfortable way. It came in layers, the way the truth always comes when someone has been careful enough to survive long enough to tell it. Cole learned about his father, Hank Mercer, road captain of the Iron Wolves MC Sonoma chapter, who had been reported dead in a traffic accident on Interstate 5 near Coalinga 7 years ago. He learned that the accident had not been an accident. He learned why. He learned what Hank had been doing in the 7 years since he had stopped being dead in any official sense, which was to say he had been building something, slowly and carefully, and at a cost that Hank did not itemize, but that Cole could read in the way the man moved through the world, in the particular economy of someone who had stripped away everything unnecessary and was running on what remained. Hank taught him other things too: how to read body language, how to identify surveillance, how to move through a crowd without being the thing a crowd remembers, how to know the difference between a reflection and a tracking light, how to deliver something to someone without appearing to deliver it, how to hide the important thing inside the obvious thing so that the people watching for the delivery do not see it happen. He said at the end of the 10th month, "I am going to give you something to carry." Cole had looked at him. Hank said, "It will look like a book." Cole said, "It is a book." Hank almost smiled. He said, "There is a man named Stone Gallagher. He is the president of the Iron Wolves Sonoma chapter. He has been my brother for 20 years, and there is no other person on earth I would trust with what I am going to ask you to carry. Cole said, how will I find him? Hank said, go to Sturgis in August. You will know him when you see him. Cole had been watching for him for 9 days. He had the spot behind the dumpster on the eastern edge of the Full Throttle saloon lot figured out by his second day. It was the kind of position that gave him sightlines in 3 directions, without requiring him to be visible from any of them. The rally roared around him continuously, 50,000 engines at different pitches, the smell of hot asphalt and engine oil and something almost electrical in the air. And Cole sat with his back against the dumpster and his knees pulled to his chest and the coverless paperback open on his right knee and 43 cents balanced in his left palm, and he watched people. The Black Hills sat in the distance the way mountains always sit, ancient and completely indifferent to whatever human activity was taking place at their feet. Cole found this comforting in a way he could not have explained. Mountains did not have opinions about you. Mountains did not have paperwork. He was not reading. He had not needed the pages for weeks. He knew the story well enough by now that it lived somewhere below the level of conscious thought, which was where the most important things always ended up eventually. He was watching the merchandise corridor on the north side of the saloon lot when he first saw them. The man was 6'2", built like something that had been assembled from the ground up, with durability as the primary specification, wearing a cut with patches Cole had been taught to recognize. Iron Wolves, Sonoma chapter. President. He moved through the crowd with the particular stillness of someone who does not need to establish presence because presence is simply what they are. People moved around him the way water moves around a fixed point, not because they were afraid exactly, but because something in the architecture of him communicated without effort that he was not going to be the one who adjusted. The girl was 9 years old. She was wearing tiny leather boots that she had clearly chosen herself, and she was holding 2 of the man's fingers with her whole hand, and she was explaining something about the helmet display in front of them with the focused intensity of someone who had been thinking about this particular topic for a long time and was finally in a position to share her conclusions. The man was listening with his full attention, not the attention people perform when they are half elsewhere, the real kind. The kind that costs something. Cole recognized both of them from the photographs Hank had shown him in the tutoring room at Desert Sun. Stone Gallagher and his daughter Daisy. He had found them on day 9. He let out a slow breath that he had not entirely realized he had been holding. He was still watching them when the dog appeared. It came from the direction of the food vendors, a golden retriever, with a collar tag that caught the August sun, moving at the kind of full-body, joyful speed that golden retrievers achieve when they have somewhere to be, and the entire universe is invited. The tag read Biscuit. Biscuit had no awareness of the rally or the crowd or the chrome or the asphalt or the fact that he was currently threading between approximately $200,000 worth of motorcycles. Biscuit had a destination in mind. Daisy saw him the same moment Cole did from opposite ends of the lot. She let go of Stone's fingers and ran. Stone turned 1 second later, which was the second that Duke Rafferty, president of the Iron Wolves Tucson chapter, appeared at Stone's left shoulder with his hand extended. Cole had seen Rafferty's photograph too. He knew who he was. He did not know what Rafferty was doing appearing at Stone's shoulder at this exact moment, at the exact moment Daisy had run into the open ground of the lot. He filed that. Some part of him below conscious thought was already measuring it, turning it over, looking at the shape of the coincidence and finding the shape wrong. Then he saw the laser dot. It was a thin thread of red light moving across the gravel of the open lot with a patience and directionality that had nothing natural in it. Not a reflection off chrome, not a trick of the August sun. This was controlled. This was coming from somewhere at distance from a human hand at the end of something that was aimed with deliberate care. It moved from right to left across the open ground, and it found Daisy Gallagher at the center of the lot, and it stopped moving. Cole was already standing. He did not make a sound. There was no time for sound, and some part of him below words understood this without being told. He came from behind the dumpster at a full sprint, 22 feet of open gravel between him and the girl, the coverless paperback hitting the ground behind him, and 43 cents scattering somewhere in the dust, and none of it mattering at all. None of it. Because the only thing that mattered in this exact configuration of the world was the distance between where he was and where Daisy Gallagher was standing. He hit her at the waist with everything he had. They went down together behind a parked Harley-Davidson Road King, on the lot's eastern edge, Cole's body covering hers, his chin connecting with the asphalt hard enough to split the skin. A shot came, not the way gunshots sound in movies, smaller than that, and sharper, a crack like a branch breaking, cleanly swallowed almost immediately by the ambient roar of 50,000 engines, so that most of the people in that lot never registered it at all. The bullet caught Cole across the left shoulder, tearing through the gray hoodie he had been wearing since Phoenix and spinning him sideways into the concrete. The pain arrived a full second after the impact, bright in total and clarifying in the specific way that serious pain is clarifying, burning away everything that is not absolutely essential. Then the world tilted and went quiet in the particular way worlds go quiet when a body has absorbed more than it was ready for in a short amount of time. Daisy was underneath him, unhurt, breathing. She was blinking at the August sky with an expression that had not yet decided what it was going to be. Cole could not move his left arm. He stared at the underside of the Harley and listened to the rally continue around him with its complete indifference to what had just happened. He thought about the book he had dropped. He thought about whether it had landed face down or face up. He thought about whether any of this had worked the way it was supposed to work. He thought the book cannot be lost. Then Stone Gallagher was there. Cole knew it was him before he could see his face. He knew it from the weight of the presence, from the way the air around him reorganized itself. Stone crouched beside Cole with his forearms on his knees and his eyes moving across Cole's face with the focused, unhurried attention of a man who needs to understand something completely before he allows himself to react to it. His hands were steady. His voice, when he spoke, was low and controlled in the specific way of someone who has spent years learning that control is the most useful thing a man can bring to a situation where nothing else is stable. He said, "I have you. Stay still." Cole said the book. His voice came out wrong, thin, and compressed. "There is a book on the ground back there by the dumpster. Gray paperback. No cover." Stone looked at him for a moment. Then he looked at Dax Holden, who had appeared at his left side, and something passed between them without words. Dax stood and walked back toward the dumpster. Cole closed his eyes. The three black SUVs arrived 4 minutes after the shot. Stone clocked them the moment they turned into the lot, before the doors were open, before anyone had identified themselves. 3 vehicles, no visible plates, moving into the full-throttle lot with a speed and a coordination that had nothing scrambled about it. Not the movement of law enforcement responding to an emergency. Emergency response looks like controlled chaos. Eyes moving in all directions, radios, perimeters being established. The organized disorder of people who are reacting. This looked like none of that. This looked like execution. Special Agent Craig Weston came out of the lead vehicle first. Stone had been in enough rooms with federal agents over 2 decades to read the specific body language of a man operating from a plan rather than from information. And Weston wore it plainly if you knew what you were looking at. He moved directly and without hesitation toward the eastern edge of the lot, toward the Harley, behind which Cole Briggs was lying with a bullet in his left shoulder. And he did not sweep for a shooter, did not establish a cordon, did not do any of the things a lead agent managing an active scene would do as his first priority. He walked straight to the bleeding boy. Stone stepped back half a step and let it happen. He was watching Weston's face. He saw Weston look at Cole's face for a long moment, and he saw what moved behind Weston's eyes. In that moment, the thing that Weston was trying not to show and almost managed. Not surprise. Something older than surprise. Something that had been sitting in Weston's chest for a long time and had just been confirmed. Recognition. The paramedic, a woman named June Holden from the Rapid City Regional Mobile Unit, moved in beside Cole and began the assessment with the practiced efficiency of someone who had worked rally events long enough to have seen most categories of injury. She checked his airway, his breathing, his circulation. She reached for his left arm to check the wound. She pushed the hoodie sleeve up past the elbow. And she stopped. Not the startled stop of someone who has encountered something unexpected. The deliberate stop of someone whose body has made a decision that their mind is still arriving at. She held her hands 3 inches above Cole's forearm for 4 complete seconds without moving. Her partner came around the side of the gurney, looked down at the boy's arm, and took 1 slow step backward. The kind of step a man takes when his body understands something slightly ahead of his conscious mind. Dax Holden had come back with the book. He set it on the ground beside Stone's boot without explanation and looked at the forearm. Something happened to his face that Stone had never seen happen to it in 15 years of riding together. The color left it, not quickly, slowly, like water draining from something that had been holding it without knowing. Reed Flynn, Sergeant-at-Arms, said nothing. He took 2 steps backward, and his eyes went to Stone, and the question in his eyes was one that neither of them could answer in a parking lot full of federal agents. Stone stepped forward. He crouched down beside the gurney with his forearms on his knees, and he looked at the tattoo on Cole Briggs' left forearm with the focused, unhurried attention of a man who needs to be absolutely certain before he allows himself to react. He was certain within 3 seconds. A broken compass rose, a 7-pointed star overlaid at the center, and embedded in the geometry of it, visible only when you knew to look and knew the angle, a single letter pressed into the design like a signature. And beside it, one more, HM, Hank Mercer. Stone had been sitting at a kitchen table in Sonoma when Hank Mercer had rolled up his sleeve and shown him that tattoo for the first and only time. A bottle of Jack Daniels between them. A Tuesday night in October, 7 years and 3 months ago. Hank had explained the design quietly and without drama, the way Hank explained everything, laying it out piece by piece until the picture assembled itself. He had said, if anything ever happens to me and someone shows you this, trust them completely. No questions, no delays, just trust. Stone had laughed. He had said nothing is going to happen to you. 3 weeks later, he was carrying Hank Mercer's casket through the parking lot of a church in Bakersfield, California in the October heat, and the weight of it had felt like the most final thing he had ever held in his hands. He was not laughing now. Stone became aware of Weston in his peripheral vision. The agent had moved 12 feet from the gurney and turned his back to the crowd, which was the move of a man who wanted privacy, not the move of a lead agent managing an active scene. His voice was low and flat, and whatever he was saying was not making it into the ambient noise of the lot, but his posture said, this situation has changed, and I need someone to know that immediately. Weston ended the call and turned back to the scene. And in one fraction of a second before he recomposed himself into the expressionless mask of federal professionalism, something crossed his face when he found Stone already looking at him. Not surprise. Calculation. The expression of a man measuring a problem and deciding in real time how to handle it. Weston was not alarmed by the tattoo. He was alarmed by Stone having seen the tattoo. Those were 2 entirely different alarms, and the distinction between them told Stone something critical. Weston already knew what the tattoo meant, which meant Weston already knew who Cole Briggs was, which meant the 4-minute arrival time had not been a coincidence and had never been a coincidence. And every second that Stone stood in this parking lot without understanding the full shape of what he was standing inside was a second that someone else was using to get ahead of him. He stood up. He looked at Dax. Dax looked back at him with eyes that were asking a question that neither of them could answer yet. Stone said one word: hospital. They rode escort to Rapid City Regional in a formation that nobody in that ambulance was going to debate. Dax on the left, Reed on the right, 2 more chapter members picked up from the rally perimeter falling in behind. The ambulance driver drove without altering his speed in any way that suggested the arrangement was a problem for him. He simply drove. Weston did not follow. Stone noted that too. He filed it in the same place he was filing everything, the growing architecture of a situation whose full shape he could not yet see, but whose outline he was beginning to trace. The waiting room on the 3rd floor of Rapid City Regional smelled like antiseptic and recycled air, in the particular exhaustion of a building that never fully sleeps. Stone sat in a plastic chair with his forearms on his knees and the paperback on the floor between his boots and let himself think. He thought about Hank Mercer, not the version of Hank that lived in the eulogy he had delivered in Bakersfield, the road captain, the security architect, the brother who never missed a detail. He thought about the other version, the private one. The Hank who had shown up at Stone's kitchen table 6 weeks after Lena died, looking like a man who had walked through something that had burned away everything unnecessary and left only what was essential. Hank had been quiet that night in a way that was different from his usual quiet. His usual quiet was the quiet of a man thinking. That night, it was the quiet of a man who had already decided. He had told Stone about what he was building. Not the details, not the names. Just the fact of it. That he had found a thread and was following it, and that where it led was somewhere that certain people were going to work very hard to make sure he never arrived. Stone had told him to be careful. Hank had said careful is already built in. 3 weeks later, the accident on Interstate 5 outside Coalinga took him off the board. Stone had accepted after 6 months the thing he had never fully believed, that Hank Mercer was gone. He had been wrong. Stone reached down and picked up the paperback. He turned it over in his hands. Cover gone, spine cracked pages, soft from handling. He opened it and turned through the first pages slowly, not reading, feeling looking for the thing that was not supposed to look like it was there. He found it between pages 84 and 85, a single index card folded, once deliberately placed, not accidentally dropped. The fold crisp and intentional, like everything Hank Mercer had ever done. He unfolded it, 4 names on one side written in a hand he recognized without needing to verify. Precise, economical, pressing slightly harder than necessary into the card the way Hank always pressed when he was writing something that mattered. 3 of the names he knew personally. He read them and felt a weight settle into his chest that had nothing to do with temperature or season. He read the 4th name, his own. Below the names, in smaller writing added after the others, the ink slightly different in shade, suggesting a different pen in a different moment. They are not finished. Daisy is the message. You are the target. Stone stared at those words for a long time. The waiting room hummed around him. Somewhere down the corridor, a monitor beeped in steady rhythm. The air moved through the vents without caring about any of it. He turned the card over. On the back, in the same smaller writing, was something that had not been addressed in anything Hank had ever said to him directly. Something Hank had added perhaps at the last moment, perhaps because he understood that Stone would need more than initials and warnings to believe what he was being asked to believe. 8 words. Stone read them once and his hands began to shake. Not because of what they confirmed, because of what they meant. Someone inside the Brotherhood had already done, and had done a long time ago, in a place and at a time when Stone had been in no position to protect the person who needed protecting most. He sat with those 8 words in a plastic chair in Rapid City Regional, and the air moved through the vents and the monitor beeped down the corridor, and Daisy slept in the chair beside him, with her tiny leather boots set neatly on the floor underneath her feet. He sat there until a nurse came to tell him that Cole Briggs was out of surgery and stable, and that the boy had been asking about a book. Trust the boy, Hank had written at the bottom of the index card below the 4 names and the warnings. He knows what to carry and where. Stone stood up. He picked up the book. He put the index card back between pages 84 and 85, folded the way he had found it. He walked down the corridor toward room 412, and every step felt like the beginning of something that was going to cost him considerably more than he had budgeted for. He was not wrong about that. Daisy had been the message. He had been the target. And somewhere in a South Dakota parking lot, a 14-year-old boy with dirt on his face and 43 cents in his pocket had stepped between the message and the man it was meant to reach, and had taken the cost of that decision in the left shoulder without making a sound and without asking for anything in return. Stone pushed open the door to room 412 and stood in the doorway and looked at the boy in the bed, bandaging on his shoulder, split on his chin, closed with 3 stitches, breathing slow and even in the specific way of someone who has spent a lot of time learning to be still. Stone pulled a chair to the bedside and sat down. He set the book on the blanket beside the boy's right hand. He waited. The South Dakota sky outside the window went through its slow changes while Stone sat, and the hospital went about its work around him. He did not check the time. He had learned a long time ago that checking the time in situations where you have no control over its passage is a way of manufacturing helplessness, and he had enough of that already without manufacturing more. He thought about what he knew and what he did not know, and where the boundary between the 2 categories was moving. He knew that the shot at Sturgis had been planned. He knew that Duke Rafferty had been positioned to pull his attention at the precise moment the shot was fired, which meant Rafferty was connected to whatever had arranged the shot. He knew that Weston had arrived too fast and with too much precision for the arrival to be a response to the incident rather than a component of it. He knew that the tattoo on Cole's arm belonged to a dead man who was not dead. He knew that the index card in his pocket had 4 names on it, and that the 3rd name was going to require him to do something that he had no framework for yet, because the 3rd name was the name of someone he had trusted for 16 years, someone who had stood beside him at every significant moment of his adult life, someone whose betrayal, if betrayal was what it was, represented a failure of Stone's own judgment that he was not yet ready to examine fully. He set that aside. You filed things when they needed to be filed, and you examined them when you had the full picture. Filing without examining was not avoidance. It was discipline. He thought about the 8 words on the back of the card, and he felt the weight of them, the same way he had felt the weight of Hank's casket in Bakersfield, that particular kind of heaviness that comes not from the physical mass of a thing, but from what carrying it means. The door to room 412 opened slowly. A nurse checked the monitors and noted something on a tablet, and looked at Stone in the chair with the expression of someone who had long since stopped being surprised by the configurations in which people kept vigil at bedsides. She said the patient was stable. She said he had been in and out of light consciousness for the past hour. She said he had asked about a book both times. Stone looked at the book on the blanket beside Cole's right hand. He waited. The first gray light of the South Dakota morning was pressing against the window when Cole Briggs opened his eyes. He did not open them the way people open their eyes in movies all at once, and alert and ready. He came up slowly the way consciousness comes when it has been interrupted by something significant and is being cautious about returning. Stone watched him take in the ceiling, the window, the monitors, the room. Watched him locate Stone in the chair beside the bed and hold his gaze for a long moment with an expression that moved through assessment and recognition and something that was almost calm before it settled. Like he had already worked out most of the versions of how this moment might go. Cole said, "Where is the book?" His voice came out rough from the breathing tube they had removed 2 hours earlier. Stone reached under the chair and set the paperback on the bed beside Cole's right hand. Cole looked at it. He ran his thumb along the cracked spine once. Then he looked at Stone. "He said he got the message to you." It was not a question. Stone said yes. Cole closed his eyes, and the exhale that moved through him was the exhale of a task completed, of a thing carried across a significant distance and finally set down. Not relief in any comfortable sense of the word. The specific release that comes when the part of you that has been locked around something essential finally gets permission to open. He was quiet for a moment. Stone did not fill the silence. That was one of the first things Cole noted about him, the capacity to simply let silence exist without feeling obligated to dismantle it, which was rarer than most people understood, and which Hank had mentioned specifically. "He will not rush you," Hank had said. "He has learned that patience is the more expensive discipline." Cole said, "He prepared me for almost everything." He paused. His right hand moved to the bandaging on his left shoulder and rested there without pressing. "Almost," he said again. Stone watched him, said nothing. Cole said, "The book was not an accident. I need you to understand that before anything else. I put it where it would be found. I chose the position behind that dumpster because it had the sightlines I needed, and because anyone who came back to look for something I had dropped would find the book and not know they were supposed to find it. He taught me that. Hide the important thing inside the obvious thing. Make the delivery look like a mistake so the people watching for the delivery do not see it happen." Cole paused. "I knew if I went down, the right person would go back for the book. I planned for that." Stone was very still. He said, "You knew there would be people watching." Cole said, "He told me there would be. He told me that when the moment came, I would probably not have time to make a considered decision. He said the moment would require a reflex, not a choice, and that the only way to be ready for a reflex was to practice it until the body knew it without being told." Cole paused. He said Daisy would likely be there. He said I would see the threat before anyone else did because I would be looking for it and they would not be. He said my job was to get her down and get the book to you, and that if I did those two things, everything else he had built over 7 years would have a chance of mattering. Stone said, "He told you about Daisy." Cole said, "He told me about her since the 4th month. He showed me photographs. He told me she mattered to you the way nothing else did, and that if someone wanted to pull you into the open, she was how they would do it." He paused. "I watched you for 9 days. I needed to know your patterns and hers before I could position correctly." The South Dakota sky outside the window had moved from black to a deep gray. Somewhere down the corridor, the monitor continued its steady punctuation. Stone said quietly, "He spent 11 months preparing a 14-year-old boy for a moment that could have killed him." Cole considered this. He said, "He spent 11 months making sure I could finish something he started. There is a difference. He was not using me. He was trusting me." Cole looked at the ceiling. "I did not have a lot of experience with people trusting me before he showed up at Desert Sun. It turns out it is a harder thing to carry than anger. Anger is simple. Trust has weight." Stone said nothing for a while. Then he said, "Tell me about your file, about the group home." Cole said, "There were 3 things wrong with it. I noticed them before Hank pointed them out. which is something he mentioned once and did not mention again, but I understood from the way he said it that it mattered to him that I had seen them on my own. He paused. The first one was the birth certificate. My intake paperwork referenced a social security number that throws a federal restriction when you run it through standard verification. Not an error, a restriction. The specific kind that requires a clearance level. No county social worker in Arizona has a pathway to obtain. Cole's right hand moved along the edge of the book without gripping it. The second one was how I got to Desert Sun at all. I did not come through Arizona's standard placement process. I came through a referral from a nonprofit in Atlanta called Vanguard Youth Services. I looked it up in the facility's computer when the overnight supervisor left the room unlocked, which he did twice a week and which I had clocked within the first 10 days. Vanguard is registered through a law firm. The founding partner of that law firm retired from the FBI Atlanta field office in 2018, Stone said. And the third one, Cole said? The third one is the man who came to see me every Tuesday and Thursday for 11 months and signed the visitor log as R. Cole. He paused. I kept the serial number of the camera that recorded his visits. I kept the dates and approximate times of 3 conversations I observed through the common room window between a man I later identified as Agent Craig Weston and the facility's director. Those conversations took place after Hank began visiting me. Weston knew Hank was still alive before the shot at Sturgis. This was not an opportunistic response to something unexpected. It was a scheduled operation. Stone's hands had not moved from his knees. His face had not changed in any dramatic way. But Cole, who had been studying people's faces for 3 years as a survival mechanism, could see the precise moment when the architecture of something Stone had believed settled rearranged itself into a shape that was going to require significant reconstruction. Cole reached down and removed his right shoe. He pulled at the insole, carefully working from the heel forward, and extracted a folded piece of paper that had been living between the insole and the sole proper since Phoenix. He held it out towards Stone. He said I did not put everything in one place. He taught me that too. Stone took the paper. He unfolded it carefully. He looked at what was on it for a long moment without speaking. Cole said, hide the backup where the backup is least expected. The book was the delivery. That is the insurance. Stone folded the paper once and put it in the inside pocket of his cut, against the same side of his chest where the index card already lived. He sat with what he now had for the length of several breaths. Then he stood up. He said, I need to go to Phoenix. There is a woman there who has been holding something for the right person to come and ask about it, and I think I am the person she has been waiting for. He paused. You will stay here. Dax and Reed are outside the door, and they will not leave. Daisy will be here when you wake up. Cole said Weston will move when he realizes the book made it to you. Stone said, I know. Cole said, he cannot get to the book before you understand what it means. Stone said he will not. Cole looked at him for a moment. He said, he told me you would handle it without flinching. He said that was both your best quality and the one that had cost you the most over the years. Stone looked at him. Cole said, he also said to tell you that he is sorry for the timing. He wanted more time. The timeline moved on him. Stone picked up his jacket from the back of the chair. He said, get some rest. Cole watched him move toward the door. He said, Stone. The man stopped. Cole said, he was right about you. Stone did not turn around. He stood in the doorway for one moment, and then he walked out into the corridor, and the door swung slowly closed behind him. Cole looked at the ceiling for a while. Then he looked at the book beside his right hand. He picked it up and held it against his chest with his right arm, and lay there in the dimmed institutional light of room 412, while the South Dakota sky outside the window continued its slow transition toward morning. The 9 days Cole had spent watching the rally before he found Stone Gallagher were not 9 days of nothing. They were 9 days of the specific kind of education that nobody teaches in any school Cole had ever attended, which was the education of learning. How a large human gathering breathes, how it moves, what its rhythms are, and where its edges are, and how a person who needs to be in a specific place at a specific moment without drawing attention can position themselves to be exactly that. He had learned in those 9 days that the full-throttle saloon lot had 3 natural gathering points where large numbers of people clustered without being organized to do so. He had learned that the merchandise corridor on the north side saw its peak traffic between 11 in the morning and 2 in the afternoon, which was the window when chapter presidents and senior members tended to move through it after the morning's business and before the afternoons. He had learned that the eastern edge of the lot where the commercial dumpster sat behind a chain-link fence was the least observed space in a lot that had observation coming from multiple directions, which made it the most useful space for someone who needed to see without being seen. He had also learned in those 9 days that the discipline Hank had built into him over 11 months of Tuesdays and Thursdays was real in a way that abstract preparation is sometimes not real when the actual situation arrives. He had expected to feel more fear. He had expected the continuous roar of 50,000 engines and the scale of the gathering and the density of unfamiliar people to produce in him the particular anxiety that large crowds had always produced since the group home in Tucson, where crowds meant chaos and chaos meant loss. He had not felt that. He had felt something more like clarity, the kind of focused attention that arrives when everything unnecessary has been set aside and only what matters remains. Hank had said in the 9th month that the boy you are before a hard thing and the boy you are after it are not the same boy. He had said this matter-of-factly without drama, as though he were describing the behavior of a natural system rather than making a claim about character. He had said the distance between the two versions is not always large, and it is not always comfortable to cross, but it is always real, and the crossing is always worth something that cannot be named in advance. Cole had thought about that in the 9 days. He had thought about it sitting behind the dumpster with the coverless paperback open on his knee and 43 cents in his palm, and the rally doing its enormous indifferent thing around him. He was not sure yet which version he was. He supposed he would find out. He had also thought in those 9 days about the specific instruction Hank had given him regarding the book. Not just that it should reach Stone Gallagher, but how it should reach him, which was through a chain of events that made the reaching look like accident. Hank had been very precise about this. He had said the people watching will be looking for a deliberate transfer. They will be looking for contact for an exchange for the moment when one person passes something to another. What they will not be looking for is a boy who drops a book while being shot and a man who sends someone back for it afterward. He had paused. The difference between those two things is the difference between whether the delivery succeeds or fails. Cole had understood. He had planned accordingly. The planning had required Cole to think about something he did not enjoy thinking about, which was the possibility that he would be shot. Hank had not shied away from this in their conversations. He had said there is a real possibility that when the moment comes, the people responsible for the shot will have anticipated that something might go wrong with the primary target and will have positioned a secondary mechanism. He had said, if you go down, the book is what matters, not you. Cole had looked at him. Hank had held his gaze and not softened the statement. Cole had said understood, and he hadn't admitted in the way you mean things when you are 14 and have been through enough to understand that meaning something is different from feeling comfortable about it. He had not been comfortable. He had been prepared. Those were different things, and he had learned to value the second one more than the first because comfort was available anywhere, and preparation was not. This was what the 9 days had been. Not waiting. Preparing to finish preparing. The morning of the day he found Stone and Daisy, he had woken behind the dumpster at 5:30 when the August light was still thin and the engines that never entirely stopped had not yet reached their full daily pitch. And he had sat with his back against the metal and the book open on his knee, and he had read the pages. He did not need to read because reading them was a way of being still inside a situation that required stillness, and he had felt with a clarity that was new even to him, that today was the day. He could not have said why he knew. He had learned to stop asking why about the things he knew and start asking what to do about them. He had watched the merchandise quarter all morning. He had seen 23 chapter presidents in the time between 10 and noon moving through the vendor stalls with the particular gait of men who are not shopping but are present in a space because the space has social currency. He had seen wives and daughters and girlfriends and the particular shape of families that form around men who live the way Iron Wolves members live, which is to say families that understand loyalty as a physical practice rather than a concept. He had been watching the northern section of the quarter, his eyes moving in the pattern Hank had taught him, close medium, far far medium, close, the rhythm that allows you to monitor multiple distances simultaneously without appearing to scan when he had seen the man and the girl. He had known them from the photographs. But photographs do not carry the quality of presence, and Stone Gallagher in person had a quality of presence that the photographs had gestured toward without being able to contain. He moved through the corridor with the unhurried certainty of someone who has been exactly what he is for long enough that it no longer requires any maintenance. He was simply there in the particular way that very few people are simply anywhere, most people being present in a provisional and contingent way that can be felt even at a distance. And Daisy, the photographs had shown a girl, the person holding Stone Gallagher's hand while explaining something about motorcycle helmets with the systematic precision of someone who had been developing her thesis for months, was not a photograph. She was entirely, specifically, irreplaceably herself. Cole had watched her and thought he loves this person the way mountains love being mountains. Not effortfully, just completely. He had thought about Hank saying she matters to him the way nothing else does. He had understood what Hank meant in the abstract. Watching them in the merchandise corridor, he understood it in a way that was not abstract at all. He had understood why someone who wanted to reach Stone Gallagher would use her. He had also understood, watching them, that this was not something he was going to allow if it was in his capacity to prevent it. That was the decision. It was not complicated. It did not require extensive deliberation. It arrived in the space between one breath and the next as the most obvious and necessary conclusion available, given what he was looking at. And when the dog appeared and Daisy ran, and Rafferty materialized at Stone's shoulder, and the red dot moved across the gravel and found her, the decision was already made. And the body followed the decision. The way trained bodies follow decisions that have been made cleanly, which is without hesitation and without looking back. 22 feet. He had not measured the distance before he ran it. He knew it afterward because Stone told him in room 412 after Cole had asked how far, which was one of the first questions Cole had asked because the distance mattered to him for reasons he could not fully articulate. Reasons having to do with what it meant that a body could cross 22 feet in the time available and still arrive ahead of what was coming. 22 feet. He had spent 22 feet of distance, and the 43 cents scattered in the gravel, and the book dropped on the ground in the left shoulder he would not be able to use normally for several weeks. He had spent those things freely and without regret, and he would spend them again without changing anything about the calculation. This was what Hank had built in 11 months of Tuesdays and Thursdays. Not just the practical skills, not just the body language reading and the surveillance awareness and the message delivery and the backup plan hidden in the shoe. He had built the thing underneath all of those skills, which was the understanding that some things are worth the full cost of doing them, and that knowing what those things are and being willing to meet the full cost when it arrives is the most important capability a person can have. Cole had not known before Hank what he would spend himself on. He had not known there was anything worth spending himself on. He had been surviving, which is a worthy thing when survival is what you have. But surviving is not the same as having a direction. And before Hank Cole had not had a direction. He had had movement which looked like direction but was not the same thing. Hank had given him a direction, and the direction had cost him a shoulder and 3 stitches in his chin and 43 cents and 9 days of sleeping behind a dumpster in Sturgis, South Dakota. He would not have traded any of it. The Maricopa County Department of Child Safety Regional Office sat on a block in central Phoenix that had been gradually losing its commercial tenants for the better part of a decade. Empty storefronts on either side of a building that still had all its lights on because the work it housed did not have the luxury of closing. Stone had left the bikes 2 blocks east. He walked in wearing nothing that identified him. Plain jacket, no cut, no patches. Beverly Sims met him in a conference room on the 2nd floor rather than at her desk, and she closed the door before she said anything. She was in her mid-40s with the particular economy of movement that belonged to people who had spent years managing too many cases with insufficient resources and had stopped wasting motion on anything that did not directly advance the work. She looked at Stone the way experienced child welfare workers look at everyone who sits across from them in a conference room, which is to say with the calm and measuring attention of someone who has heard most versions of most stories and is deciding where this one fits on the spectrum of what can be trusted. She did not open her computer. Stone noted that. She pulled a physical folder from the stack she had carried in and set it on the table between them. She said, "I have been waiting for someone to come and ask about this boy. Not hoping, not expecting, waiting, with the patience of someone who had made their decision about what they were going to do when the moment arrived and had simply been holding it in place until it did. Stone said, "Tell me." She told him what Cole had already outlined, confirming each point with documentation that she laid on the table one piece at a time with the methodical care of someone who had been rehearsing this presentation in their head for a significant period of time. The restricted Social Security number. The Vanguard Youth Services referral, the Atlanta law firm, the founding partner with the FBI retirement. The visitor log spanning 11 months every Tuesday and Thursday, without exception, the name R. Cole entered in a handwriting that did not match across visits, suggesting the same person writing with slight, deliberate variation to avoid a consistent signature. The cash payments at a rate significantly above market for anything resembling standard tutoring. She laid the documents out one at a time, and Stone looked at each one and said nothing, and let her continue at the pace she had decided on, which was the pace of someone who had stored this for a long time and needed to release it in the right sequence so that it landed the way it needed to land. Then she reached into the folder and produced a single photocopy from the facility's security camera system. Grainy, time-stamped. A man at the front desk signing the visitor log with his face angled slightly away from the lens, precisely far enough to avoid clean identification. Like someone who knew exactly where the camera was positioned and had adjusted his angle accordingly naturally without appearing to think about it. But the build was there, the set of the shoulders, the particular way the man held himself in the institutional space of a group home reception desk, present in the way of someone who had walked into difficult rooms for a long time and stopped being intimidated by their furniture. Stone looked at the photocopy for a long time, the lines around the eyes, the way the jaw was set, the gray at the temples visible even in the grainy resolution of a facility security camera that had not been updated since the building was last renovated. He said, "Did he ride?" Beverly looked at him for a moment. She said front desk staff mentioned they could always hear him arriving. She paused. The engine. From inside the building. Every visit, without exception. Stone took the photocopy from the table. He folded it once and put it in the same inside pocket where the index card and Cole's folded paper already lived. He sat with what he now had for the length of 3 slow breaths. Then he thanked Beverly Sims, told her she had done the right thing, holding on to it, and told her to stay away from anything connected to this file from this point forward. He said it the way he said things that were not suggestions. She nodded once with the expression of someone who had already made that decision independently and was simply receiving confirmation that it was the correct one. Stone walked back to his bike through the Phoenix afternoon, the heat pressing down with the particular insistence of the desert in August, dry and enormous and indifferent to the temperature preferences of anything that lived in it. He sat on the bike for a moment before he started it. He looked at the building he had just left, at the lights still on in the second-floor conference room, where a woman had been waiting for the right person to arrive for longer than anyone should have to wait alone. He started the bike and rode to the motel on Van Buren Street, which asked no questions and provided nothing beyond a bed and a lock on the door. He spread everything on the small table under the window. The index card, the photocopy, Cole's folded paper with the camera serial number, and the 3 dates in the approximate times of the conversations between Weston and the Desert Sun director. His own handwritten notes from the conversation with Beverly. He looked at the 4 names on the index card. The first name was Duke Rafferty, the president of the Iron Wolves Tucson chapter, who had materialized at Stone's left shoulder at the precise moment Daisy ran into the open lot. The handshake that had pulled Stone's attention for one critical second. That did not happen by accident. Rafferty had positioned himself. He had known the window, and he had filled it on a schedule that someone else had set. Stone read the name and felt the specific anger of a man recognizing that something he had attributed to coincidence had been architecture all along. The second name was a law enforcement contact embedded in the club's legal defense network for the better part of a decade. A man trusted with information that moved in both directions, in and out, serving 2 masters simultaneously in the particular way of people who have convinced themselves that divided loyalty is still loyalty as long as both sides are getting something. Stone would say that name out loud once in the right room and at the right moment, not before. The third name he looked at and looked away from in rotation, his mind refusing to hold it still. because this was the name of someone from his own Sonoma chapter. Someone who had known the Sturgis itinerary down to the timing, known that Daisy would be there, known the geography of the full-throttle lot and the specific window of exposure that appeared when Stone stopped moving to acknowledge a fellow chapter president. Someone who had stood as best man at Stone's wedding 16 years ago, and who had stood beside him at the Fresno grave 6 years ago, and who had been one of 4 people Stone had told about Danny when Danny died in the raw days immediately after, when Stone had still been capable of the kind of grief that required an audience. Stone put the index card face down on the table. He did not turn it back over. He sat at the table with the window showing him the Van Buren Street evening, the neon signs coming on as the light faded the particular palette of a Phoenix night in August orange and purple, and the flat white of streetlights. He sat and thought and let the thinking take as long as it needed to take, because the alternative to thinking it through completely was making a move before the full shape of the situation was clear. And Stone had survived 20 years in circumstances where incomplete information led to irreversible outcomes by learning that patience before action was not hesitation. It was precision. He thought about what Cole had told him, about the 3 conversations Weston had held with the Desert Sun director after Hank began his visits, about the escalating urgency of the 3rd conversation compared to the first 2, about what that escalation implied, which was that Weston had been monitoring the situation, and that something in month 9 or 10 had changed the parameters in a way that required a faster response than Weston had originally planned for. He thought about what Beverly Sims had confirmed, about the infrastructure that had been built around Cole's file, the restricted Social Security number, the nonprofit front, the law firm connection. That kind of infrastructure was not assembled quickly. It had been in place before Cole arrived at Desert Sun, which meant someone had anticipated that Cole would need to be contained before Cole was old enough to be a problem, which meant someone had known about Cole's existence and his connection to Hank Mercer for a long time, possibly since before Hank's staged death on Interstate 5. He thought about the 8 words on the back of the index card. Danny was not an accident. Check Fresno. He had read those 8 words in the waiting room at Rapid City Regional, and his hands had begun to shake before he finished the second word, and he had sat with them in the plastic chair while Daisy slept in the recliner beside him, with her tiny leather boots on the floor, and he had not told anyone. Not Dax, not Reed, not anyone. Because if those 8 words meant what he believed they meant, and there was no construction of them that he could arrive at that meant anything else, then the thing that had been done to Danny had not been done by the system in the careless, impersonal way that systems sometimes destroy the people in their care without malice or intention. It had been done deliberately, by people who knew whose son Danny was and who had made a specific decision about what to do with that knowledge. Stone had lost Danny 6 years ago, in a Fresno group home 1 year after Hank had supposedly died, on Interstate 5 in the 12 months when Stone was serving time and had no ability to reach his son and had trusted the system to do what systems are supposed to do. The system had failed. The official finding had been accidental, death negligent supervision, a tragedy, a closed file. He had accepted that. He had accepted it the way you accept things that you cannot change and that you cannot afford to keep bleeding from by building a structure around the wound that was strong enough to let you continue functioning. Those 8 words told him the structure had been built around a lie. He was still sitting at that table, the Phoenix night, fully dark outside the window, the index card face down between his hands when the burner phone rang. The number was known to fewer than 6 people, and he had not shared it since Sturgis. Unknown number. He answered it and said nothing. Silence on the other end. Not empty silence, occupied silence. The kind that belongs to someone standing at the edge of something irreversible, composing themselves before they step off. The particular held breath quality of a man who has made his decision and is taking one last moment inside it before the speaking makes it real. Then a voice, older than he remembered it, worn at the edges in the way that accumulates when a voice has spent years speaking to almost no one. Rougher at the register, he remembered as smooth, but beneath the roughness, the specific cadence that Stone would have known in any condition at any remove of time. The precise and unhurried way of a man who had never once said anything by accident. Stone's hand tightened around the phone until he could feel his own pulse against the casing. He had buried this voice. He had stood over the grave in Bakersfield and said the words and driven away and spent 7 years accepting the specific silence where this voice had been. Hank, he said, a pause that lasted exactly long enough. Long enough to be real and not so long as to perform anything. Then they know you went to Phoenix. Get back to Rapid City tonight. Cole is going to wake up, and when he does, the people on that card cannot be in a position to reach him first. Stone was already on his feet, already scanning the room for what he needed to take, already calculating the ride time and the route. Then Hank said the thing that stopped him. The sniper was not there for Daisy. Hank's voice was completely steady when he said it. The steadiness of a man who has been carrying a specific piece of information for a long time and has made whatever peace with it a person can make with something that has cost this much. Daisy was never the target, Hank said. You were. She was the mechanism to break your position and pull you into the open where the shot could find you. Stone stood in the center of the motel room with his jacket in one hand and the phone in the other, and felt the shape of Sturgis rearrange itself around him. Not a reactive plan, a constructed one. Duke Rafferty positioned to pull his attention. The shot timed to the window Rafferty's handshake created. Daisy as the catalyst. Stone as the actual target, standing exposed in the lot the moment Daisy ran and Rafferty appeared. The entire sequence engineered by someone who understood exactly how Stone Gallagher moved and what he would sacrifice and what would make him stand still long enough to be taken off the board permanently. He said the back of the card. Hank said, you already read it. Stone said yes. A silence. Then Hank said, then you understand that this did not begin with me. Stone said nothing. Hank said Danny was the second move. I was the first. They needed me gone before I found what I was looking for. They needed Danny gone because Danny was leverage they could not allow you to have while you were in a position to be a problem. He paused. I found the Fresno documentation 14 months into my investigation. I built it into the dossier when I understood what it meant. I am sorry I could not tell you sooner. The timing of what I was building did not allow for it. Stone stood in the Phoenix motel room and said nothing for a long moment. Hank said, someone is inside the club. The card tells you who. Before you act on that, get back to Rapid City. Cole needs to be out of that hospital and away from the reach of the people on that card before anything else moves. Stone said the third name. Hank said yes. Stone said he was at my wedding. Hank said, I know. I am sorry for that too. He paused. Everything I am sorry for, I will tell you in person. Right now you need to ride. The line went dead. Stone stood in the silence of the motel room for 3 breaths. Then he looked at Dax, who was already standing, who had read the room from the other side of the phone call without needing to hear the words. Stone said 4 words. Someone is inside the club. In 15 years of riding together through courtrooms and hospital waiting rooms, in situations that had tested every version of Dax Holden that existed, Stone had never once seen the man's face change color the way it changed in that Phoenix motel room. The color left it slowly like water draining from something that had been holding it without knowing it was holding it. And what was left underneath was not fear exactly, but the expression of a man whose understanding of a landscape he had believed settled has just been fundamentally revised. They rode through the night without stopping. Phoenix to Rapid City is not a short road under any circumstance, 1,400 miles of American darkness. The desert giving way to plateau, giving way to the slow geological argument of the Rockies before the land finally opened into the long grass and enormous sky of South Dakota. Under different circumstances, it was the kind of ride that Stone lived for. The kind where the distance between where you started and where you are going creates enough space for a man to find the edges of his own thinking. These were not those circumstances. He rode hard and silent, and Dax and Reed held formation without being asked because they understood without needing it, explained that whatever was moving toward them was moving on a clock. None of them controlled. The burner phone sat in his inside pocket next to the index card and the photocopy and Cole's folded paper, and he did not look at any of it. He had everything he needed from those items. What he needed now was to cover the distance between Phoenix and Rapid City Regional before the people whose names lived on that card understood that the delivery had been completed and that the window for preventing what came next was closing. The desert gave him the first 4 hours. Then the elevation began to change and the air cooled, and the stars above the plateau became the kind of stars that are only visible when the land is flat enough and empty enough to stop competing with the sky. Stone rode through them and thought about Hank Mercer alive in a world where Stone had been grieving him for 7 years. He thought about what that required, what architecture of discipline and loneliness, what particular kind of strength it took to stay gone when everything you had ever valued was on the other side of gone. He thought about Hank showing up at Desert Sun Group home in Phoenix on a Tuesday afternoon and sitting down across from a 14-year-old boy who did not know who he was and beginning the work of preparing that boy for something that was going to hurt. He thought about what that said about what Hank understood was coming and how clearly he had seen it coming to make those preparations to spend 11 months building a contingency that was also a son. They crossed into South Dakota with the sky beginning to lighten at its eastern edge, the deep black giving way to the particular dark blue that precedes everything else. And Stone pushed the pace up because they were inside the final stretch, and he needed the hospital to still be the situation he had left rather than a situation that had been altered in his absence. Room 412 was quiet at 5:40 in the morning. The two chapter members outside the door were still there, upright and alert, in the way of men who understand without needing to be told that what they are guarding is not replaceable. Stone exchanged 4 words with each of them. Nothing more was necessary. He pushed the door open slowly. Daisy was asleep in a recliner in the corner, her tiny leather boots set side by side on the floor beneath her feet, a hospital blanket pulled to her chin, a granola bar wrapper on the windowsill beside a paper cup. Someone had brought her food at some point, and she had eaten it in the recliner without leaving, which was consistent with the information Reed had relayed during the ride, which was that Daisy had refused to sleep in any location other than the room, had refused to eat anywhere other than the room, and had made her position on the subject clear enough that Reed had eventually stopped arguing it and negotiated the cafeteria compromise instead, which Daisy had accepted on the condition that she was allowed to take the food back to the room. Stone stood at the foot of her chair for a moment and looked at his daughter sleeping in a hospital room and felt something move through him that had no name he could locate, something that lived below the level of language, in the part of a person that understands without articulation the specific weight of almost losing something irreplaceable. He had stood at a grave in Bakersfield once and understood that specific weight, and he was standing with it again now, in a hospital room in South Dakota. Except this time the thing was still here, still breathing, her tiny boots on the floor, and her hands folded on the blanket over her chest. Then he turned to the bed. Cole Briggs was awake. He had not heard the door open. He had simply opened his eyes in the darkness of the room and located Stone in the doorway with the same absence of surprise he had shown in every configuration of this situation, as though he had pre-mapped enough possible versions that the actual version was always within his prepared range. Stone pulled the chair to the bedside and sat. He did not speak immediately. He let Cole see that he had come back and what the coming back had required and what he had found in Phoenix, and what it meant communicated in the way that men who have been in difficult situations together communicate things through posture and stillness and the absence of anything that is not true. Cole said after a moment, "You found her." Stone said yes. Cole said in the photograph. Stone said yes. Cole was quiet for a moment. The South Dakota morning was beginning its slow project on the sky, outside the window, darkness giving way to the first gray, the gray giving way to the pale suggestion of gold that would eventually be the full morning. Cole watched it for a moment. Then he said, "He told me about Danny." Stone said nothing. His hands were open on his knees. Cole said, "He told me into the 7th month. He said he had found the Fresno documentation while he was building the case against Weston 14 months into his investigation. He said finding it had changed the shape of everything he thought he understood about how long this had been going on and how far into the structures it had reached." The pause between that sentence and the next one was long enough to be intentional. He said your son did not die because the system failed him. He said your son died because someone inside a specific network made a specific decision and then used the same infrastructure they had used to protect Weston to ensure that decision stayed buried. Stone sat with that in the chair beside the bed in the dimmed room while the South Dakota sky continued its work outside the window. Cole said he wanted to tell you himself. He said it was not information that should travel through a 14-year-old boy. But he also knew there was a real possibility he would not be able to tell you himself, and that you would need to know it regardless. Because without it, the card does not make complete sense, and a map with a missing piece is worse than no map at all. Stone said after a long moment, he always read the situation further ahead than anyone else in the room. Cole said he reads them. Present tense, Stone looked at him. Cole said, "He is not finished." Outside the window, the first real light was arriving. Daisy turned in the recliner without waking, pulling the hospital blanket more closely around her shoulders. The monitor down the corridor beeped its steady rhythm. The room held everything in it, and the room was quiet. Stone said, "There is something else I need to ask you." Cole said, "The paper from my shoe." "You want to understand what those conversations meant? The ones between Weston and the director?" Stone said, "Yes." Cole said, "I could not hear them. I was observing through glass at a distance that did not allow for audio. But body language carries information that audio sometimes obscures, and I had spent enough months watching Hank read rooms to understand what I was looking at." He paused. The director was afraid. Not professionally uncomfortable, not the anxiety of someone managing a difficult compliance situation. Genuinely afraid. And Weston was not threatening him, which is what you do when you need to establish compliance. He was reassuring him, which is what you do when the compliance is already established and the arrangement is under pressure from a change in circumstances. Cole's eyes moved to the window and back. The reassurance was calibrated differently the third time than the first two. More urgency in it, less patience. Something had shifted in the interval between the first conversation and the third that required Weston to spend more energy managing the director's fear. Stone said, "When was the first conversation?" Cole said 11 days after Hank's first visit to Desert Sun. 11 days. Weston had surveillance on the group home before Hank arrived. Positioned in advance, which meant Weston had anticipated that Hank would eventually surface in connection with Cole, which meant Weston's understanding of what Hank was building extended further back than anything the sequence of events at Sturgis alone would have suggested. He had been waiting for Hank to make a move toward Cole. The question of how long he had been waiting and what that waiting implied about how thoroughly Hank's operation had been penetrated was a question Stone filed for later. He looked at Cole for a long moment. The boy in the bed, 14 years old, left shoulder bandaged, split chin, closed with 3 stitches, the book from Desert Sun Group home beside his right hand, the discharge bracelet on his right wrist. The particular stillness of someone who has been through enough, that stillness is no longer the absence of something but the presence of something else. Stone said, "We need to move soon. When the people on that card understand that the delivery completed, they will begin adjusting their position. We need to be ahead of that adjustment rather than behind it." Cole said, "What do you need from me?" Stone said, "Rest. You have done your part. Let me do mine now." Cole considered this. He said you would say something like that. He said you had a tendency to take on the weight of things alone when other people were available to help carry them, and that it was a habit worth examining. Stone almost said something. He stood instead. He picked up his jacket from the back of the chair. He stood at the foot of the bed and looked at Cole Briggs for a long moment in the dimmed light of room 412. And what he saw in the boy's face was something he recognized from a long time ago, from a place inside himself that had been quiet for 6 years. He recognized it, and he did not name it. He said, "I will be back before anything moves." He walked to the door. Cole said, "Stone." The man stopped with his hand on the doorframe. Cole said, "He was right to trust you. I did not know that for certain until tonight. Now I do." Stone stood in the doorway without turning around for the length of 3 slow breaths. Then he walked out into the corridor and the door swung closed behind him, and Cole Briggs lay in the bed with the book against his chest and let himself, for the first time since Phoenix, close his eyes without measuring the exits first. The morning came the way mornings come in South Dakota in August, without apology and without delay, the sky going from the deep blue of pre-dawn to the wide gold of full morning in the space of less than an hour. Stone sat in the chair beside Cole's bed and let the light change around him, and did not speak, and Cole did not speak, and between them the silence was the productive kind. The kind that allows 2 people in the same room with the same set of difficult facts to arrive at the same place without the interference of words. Reed brought coffee at 7, 2 cups. He set them on the tray without comment and left without being asked. Dax came in at 7:30 and stood by the window for a moment, looking out at the hospital's east-facing view, then looked at Stone, and Stone gave him the smallest nod, which was enough. Cole said when Dax had gone, "What happens today?" Stone said, "Today, we build the shape of what comes next." Cole said the lot. Stone said, "Yes. There are members who can be at the full throttle lot by noon. Not a formal meeting, nothing recorded. But the people on that card need to be addressed, and the dossier needs to be in the hands that can use it, and none of that happens until the gathering happens." Cole said, "I want to be there." Stone looked at him. Cole said not to speak, not to do anything that requires my shoulder. I want to be there when he comes because I need to see his face when he sees that it worked. He spent 11 months preparing me for something that was going to hurt and that I was going to have to do alone in a crowd of strangers. I did it. I would like him to know that in person." He paused. "I think I have earned that." Stone looked at this 14-year-old boy in the hospital bed, at the steadiness of him, at the way he inhabited the situation he was in, without either dramatizing it or minimizing it, simply present with it, which was the particular quality of someone who had been through enough to know that neither dramatizing nor minimizing changes the facts. Stone said, "The doctor clears you at 11. Cole said, "Then I will be ready at 11. The east lot of the Full Throttle Saloon held 57 Iron Wolves by noon. They came from Sonoma and Tucson and Oakland and Las Vegas and Denver chapters, represented by their road captains and sergeants at arms, and members who had been in the club long enough to understand the difference between a meeting and a reckoning. Every engine was off. The rally continued beyond the lot's perimeter, that vast and continuous sound of 50,000 engines doing what they were built to do, moving through the August air, with the complete indifference of machines that have no awareness of the human drama taking place 300 yards from the vendor corridor. Inside the east lot, the silence was a physical thing, something with weight and texture. Cole sat on a cooler at the southern edge of the gathering. His discharge bracelet was still on his right wrist. He was wearing a clean shirt someone had brought from the rally vendors that morning, blue and plain, and above the collar, you could see the edge of the bandaging on his left shoulder. Daisy was beside him, shoulder touching his in the close and deliberate way that 9-year-olds position themselves when they have decided on something. Her tiny leather boots on the gravel, her eyes on Stone at the center of the lot. Cole was watching everything. Stone stood at the center and he spoke for 9 minutes. He did not raise his voice and he did not use notes, and he laid it out the way Hank Mercer had always laid things out, in the precise order that allowed each piece to prepare the ground for the next one. The tattoo and what it meant, the book and the index card and the 4 names on it. Phoenix and Beverly Sims in the visitor logs, in 11 months of a man who was supposed to be dead, preparing a 14-year-old boy in a Phoenix group home for a mission that only made sense if you understood what the boy had been carrying and who he had been carrying it toward. He spoke about Danny. He said it plainly and without protective softening, because the people listening had a right to hear it clearly, and because there was no version of it that was softer than itself. He said what the 8 words on the back of the card said, and he said what that meant. And the silence that followed that particular section was a silence that Cole, watching from the southern edge, had not heard before. Not the silence of shock. The silence of a community absorbing something that required the recalibration of everything that had been understood as settled. When Stone reached the 3rd name, the name from the Sonoma chapter, the name of the person who had known the Sturgis schedule and the Full Throttle layout and the precise geometry of the moment when Daisy would run into open ground, while Rafferty appeared at Stone's shoulder, he said it once, clearly, at a volume that carried to every edge of the lot without effort. The silence after that name was denser than what had come before it. The silence of 57 people absorbing a betrayal, simultaneously each arriving at the same destination from the particular angle of their own relationship with the name that had just been spoken. Some looked at the ground. Some did not move at all. One chapter president, a man who had sat across from federal prosecutors for 2 decades without his expression changing, sat down on his bike and put both hands over his face and stayed that way. Duke Rafferty stood at the eastern edge of the gathering with his hands at his sides and his chin level, and the expression of a man who has known for a significant period of time that a specific moment was coming and has prepared himself to receive it, standing upright rather than running from it. Whatever Rafferty was, whatever choices he had made, under whatever pressure across however many years, he was not a man who ran from the weight of his own choices. It was Sawyer Kane who moved first. Sawyer Kane was the road captain of the Dallas chapter, an ordained Baptist minister before he had ever thrown a leg over a Harley, a man who had made his accounting with the world at some point in his past and found the terms of it acceptable and moved through everything that came after from a place of settled gravity. He removed his riding gloves. He folded them once deliberately and placed them on his fuel tank, and then he put one knee on the South Dakota asphalt. No announcement, no ceremony, no request that anyone else follow. He bowed his head. Dax Holden went down next, then Reed Flynn, Then riders from Oakland and Las Vegas and Denver in a wave that moved outward from the center of the lot like something propagating through water, finding each man in turn, each one making the same decision independently in the same moment. Chapter presidents and road captains and men who had not bent a knee to anything in their adult lives going down one after another in the August heat while the rally continued its roar beyond the perimeter. Completely unaware of the silence inside it, Duke Rafferty went down on both knees. He was crying before his second knee touched the ground. Not the managed crying of a man handling an impression, but the involuntary kind, the kind that arrives before the decision not to is available. He knelt on the South Dakota asphalt and let what needed to move through him, and he did not try to shape it into something more manageable. 57 men on the asphalt of a South Dakota parking lot in August. Cole sat on the cooler at the southern edge and watched and did not speak. Daisy's shoulder was against his, and her hand had found his without either of them making a conscious decision about it, and he held it with his right hand and let the weight of what he was seeing land on him without trying to compress it into anything smaller than it was. He had not cried in 3 years. He did not cry now. But something happened in his chest that occupied the same territory, something that moved through him in a wave that had no name in any language he knew, but that felt in some important way like the beginning of the end, of something he had been carrying since before he understood that he was carrying it. Something that had no name because the people who might have named it for him had not been there when he needed naming done. It was Daisy who saw the motorcycle first. She said quietly without urgency, her hand tightening slightly in Cole's, "There is someone coming from the North Road." Cole looked up. A 1987 Harley-Davidson Sportster, matte black, no markings, no patches. Moving at the deliberate pace of someone who is not attempting to make an entrance, but understands that the circumstances make one unavoidable. It came in from the northern access road and moved across the perimeter of the lot and stopped at the eastern edge 30 feet from where Duke Rafferty was still kneeling on the ground. The rider removed his helmet. 57 men who had been in motion, spiritual or physical or both, went absolutely still. Because the face beneath the helmet was a face that the majority of them had last seen in a photograph at a funeral in Bakersfield, California 7 years ago. Older now, weathered in the specific way of a man who has spent years outdoors and alone and moving without the ballast of any fixed place. Gray at the temples that had not been there in the photograph. Lines around the eyes that spoke of the particular exhaustion of a life lived in constant vigilance. The kind that does not diminish you, but marks you the way all significant costs mark the people who pay them. But the eyes themselves were the same, precise and calm, and carrying the weight of everything they had witnessed without being broken by any of it. Hank Mercer looked at 57 men looking back at him. He reached into his jacket and produced a sealed manila envelope, and he looked across 200 feet of silent asphalt directly at Stone Gallagher. When he spoke, his voice carried in the silence the way voices carry when everything else has stopped to listen. He said it was never about the club. It was about what the club knew and did not know it knew. He held up the envelope. He said, "This is the dossier. It names the agent who killed my daughter. It names who protected him and how and for how long and at what cost to people who deserve better than to carry someone else's crime. It names why that person needed me gone and why they will need every one of you gone if this reaches the wrong hands." He paused. He said the driver who killed Lena was not a civilian. He began walking through 57 kneeling men who parted as he moved toward the center of the lot and then toward the southern edge where Cole Briggs was sitting on a cooler with Daisy Gallagher beside him, discharge bracelet on his wrist, the book visible in the pocket of his jacket, his right hand around Daisy's hand. Cole watched him come. He had not prepared for this specific moment. Hank had prepared him for almost everything, prepared him with the methodical thoroughness of a man building something he might not be present to see completed, who needed the person completing it to be fully equipped for every foreseeable contingency. But this moment, this specific experience of watching the person who had taught him almost everything he knew about how to survive a dangerous world walking toward him across a South Dakota parking lot, with 7 years on his face and the envelope in his hand, this was outside the range of what preparation covered. Some things you just have to receive. Hank stopped in front of him and crouched down to eye level. He looked at Cole for a long moment. The look between them was not the look of strangers. It carried the texture of something built over time in a specific room On specific days across 11 months, Tuesday and Thursday, the tutoring room at Desert Sun, the stack of books on the table between them that had never been only about the books. Cole looked back at him. Hank said, "You did exactly right." Cole said it hurt. Hank put his hand on Cole's right shoulder. The good one, he held it there and did not move for a long moment. He said, "I know. I am sorry for that." He held out the envelope. Cole took it with both hands. He opened it with the deliberate care of someone who understands that what they are holding has a weight that goes beyond its physical dimensions, and that the opening of it is an act that cannot be undone. Stone had been president of the Iron Wolves Sonoma chapter for 11 years, which was long enough to understand that the role was not primarily about authority. Authority was the visible part, the part that other people saw and responded to and occasionally tested. The actual work of the role was something more like sustained attention, the particular kind of attention that keeps track of 50 separate human situations simultaneously and notices when one of them has changed in a way that matters before the change becomes a problem. He had been good at this for a long time. He had developed the capacity for it through years of practice and through the particular education of watching men he respected both succeed and fail at the same task, noting what the successes and failures had in common, adjusting accordingly. Hank Mercer had been the person he learned the most from in this regard. Hank had an almost preternatural ability to read the shape of a situation before the shape was visible, to understand what was developing from what had already developed, to see the consequence inside the cause before the cause had fully arrived. Stone had spent years trying to learn how Hank did this. He had eventually concluded that it was not a learnable skill exactly, or not entirely, but rather a disposition, a fundamental orientation toward information that processed it constantly and without the filters that most people applied, the filters of assumption and expectation and the desire for things to be other than they were. Hank looked at things as they were, all the time, without flinching. And because he looked at things as they were, he tended to see them before other people who were still looking at what they expected to see. Stone had been trying to learn this disposition for 20 years. He had gotten better at it. He had not become Hank. In the days after Sturgis riding back from Phoenix through the South Dakota night, he had thought about what it meant that Hank had been alive for 7 years and had not told him. He had thought about this not with anger, though anger was present in it, the way it is always present when someone you trusted did not trust you with something important. He had thought about it with the particular quality of attention Hank had spent years trying to teach him, looking at the thing as it was rather than as he wanted it to be. What it was, when he looked at it clearly, was this: Hank had calculated that telling Stone he was alive would put Stone in a position that endangered Daisy, that anyone who was watching Stone, and Weston had been watching Stone, would see the change in Stone that knowledge of Hank's survival would produce and would read that change correctly and would move against Daisy before Hank's work was complete. Hank had made the calculation that the most important thing he could protect, in 7 years of building a case against the people who had killed his daughter and staged his death and would eventually go after Stone, and Daisy was Stone's genuine grief, his genuine not knowing. Because a man who genuinely does not know something cannot be read as a man who knows it, and a man who cannot be read that way does not put his daughter in the path of people who are managing what he knows. Hank had hidden in Stone's grief to protect Daisy. He had used Stone's loss as a shield for Stone's daughter. And the cost of that was borne by Stone alone in 3,000 nights of a specific silence where a specific voice had been, and in 6 years of a Fresno grave that Stone had not known was not a grave at all. When Stone arrived at this understanding somewhere in the Rockies, with the elevation rising and the air cooling, and Dax and Reed on either side of him, holding formation through the dark, he had stayed with it for a long time without moving toward a verdict. He had looked at it as clearly as he could, and he had found that he could not resolve it into something simple. It was not forgivable, exactly not yet, because forgiving required more space than the back of a motorcycle at speed in the middle of the night. But it was not unforgivable either, because the logic of it was coherent, and the motivation was one Stone understood in his bones, which was that you protect the person who cannot protect themselves first, and you explain yourself to the people who can bear the explanation afterward. Daisy could not have borne the explanation. Stone had been able to bear it. Therefore, Stone bore it without being asked and without being told for 7 years, in the way that all the unbearable things in a life are borne, which is one day at a time, and then one night at a time, and then again the next day until the carrying becomes familiar enough that you stop counting the weight. He would have done the same thing. This was the conclusion he arrived at somewhere in the Rockies with the stars overhead and the engine beneath him, and the distance to Rapid City Regional reducing itself mile by mile. He would have made the same calculation. He would have used the same tool. He would have hidden in someone's grief to protect someone else if the grief was available and the protection required it. This did not make it simple, but it made it true. And true was a thing Stone could work with even when working with it was not comfortable. He had arrived at room 412 at 5:40 in the morning, carrying all of this, and he had sat beside Cole's bed, and he had let the boy sleep, and he had sat with the full weight of what the 7 years had cost and what the next part was going to cost, and what it meant that the accounting was not finished, and he had found sitting in the plastic chair, while the South Dakota sky changed in the window, that he was not afraid of what the next part required. He was something else. Something that lived in the same territory as fear, but was oriented differently, not toward the threat, but toward the work. The specific feeling of a man who has understood what the situation requires and has decided to meet it fully, and whose body has organized itself around that decision in the way that bodies organize themselves when the decision is real. He was ready. This was what Cole had seen when Stone came back from Phoenix. Not relief and not composure and not the careful management of a difficult situation. He had seen a man who was ready. And Cole, who had been learning for 11 months from the person who had taught Stone everything he knew about reading rooms, had recognized it for exactly what it was. The morning that Stone left for Nevada, Daisy made him breakfast before he came downstairs. She had learned to make eggs from watching him make them, which meant she had been watching him make them more carefully than he had realized, and the eggs were better than she had any right to produce on the first independent attempt. And she set them on the table in front of him when he came into the kitchen and sat across from him and watched him eat with the expression of someone who had something to say and was deciding how to say it. He said, "These are good." She said, "I know." She paused. "Are you coming back?" He looked at her across the kitchen table. He said, "Yes." She held his gaze with the focused assessment of someone who has developed a reliable method for detecting when adults are saying things they believe versus things they intend to be true. After a moment, she said, "Okay." He said, "Okay." She said, "You should take a jacket. It gets cold in Nevada at night, even in August." He took the jacket. Cole came downstairs while Stone was finishing the eggs. He poured himself a glass of water and leaned against the counter and looked at the kitchen in the particular way he had been looking at rooms since arriving in Sonoma, which was with the attention of someone cataloging something they want to be able to recall accurately. Stone had noticed this and had not mentioned it. He understood what it was. It was what you did when you had not been sure you would have things to remember, and now you were not sure of the sureness. Cole said Daisy made eggs. Stone said yes. Cole said, "She is going to be impossible to live with if she figures out she can cook." Daisy from the direction of the back screen door said, "I can already cook." She said it with the particular confidence of someone who has recently received confirmation of a long-held position and does not intend to be modest about it. Stone finished the eggs. He looked at the kitchen at Daisy by the back door at Cole against the counter, at the east light coming through the window and touching the edges of everything it found. He looked at all of it for a moment in the way that you look at things you are about to leave and intend to return to. Then he went to the garage. The dossier was 94 pages. Handwritten reconstructions and photocopied documents obtained through 7 years of careful, patient, invisible work. Timeline analysis laid out with the precision of a man who had spent his career thinking in systems. Location records and photographs taken from distances that suggested a long lens and an even longer patience. 3 sworn written statements from witnesses that Hank had located in the years since his official death, people who had seen things and said nothing because nobody had ever come to ask them the right questions in a way that made them feel safe enough to answer. Special Agent Craig Weston had been a junior agent in the FBI Sacramento field office at the time of the accident on Highway 99 outside Fresno. He had been driving a personal vehicle after leaving a meeting that did not appear in any official record. The accident happened at 9:17 in the evening on a section of road with no active traffic cameras. Lena Mercer was 7 years old. She had been walking back from a neighbor's house 200 yards from her front door. Weston had stopped the car. He had gotten out. He had looked at what he had done, and then he had gotten back into the car and driven away. And in the weeks and months that followed, he had used every tool that a federal badge makes available to a frightened man to ensure that what had happened on that stretch of highway remained there. When Hank Mercer began pulling the thread 7 years later, Weston had escalated to the only solution that felt permanent. He had reached through a network of contacts and intermediaries to arrange for what happened on Interstate 5 near Coalinga, the accident that had not been an accident, the accident that had closed Hank's official file and bought Weston the time he believed he needed to be beyond reach. Duke Rafferty's section of the dossier was harder to read in a different way. The documentation was complete and specific and showed clearly the mechanism by which a man who had been a decent person in most of the ways that mattered had been compressed over 11 years into a shape that served someone else's purposes entirely. Weston had been holding something over Rafferty since before Rafferty joined the Iron Wolves, something personal and catastrophic that had nothing to do with the club and everything to do with a single event from Rafferty's past that Weston had discovered through the surveillance infrastructure of his position. The dossier named what it was. It named it plainly and without editorial commentary. Rafferty had made wrong choices. The dossier did not minimize that, but it showed the mechanism fully and completely, the years of pressure and the specific points at which Rafferty had been given the choice between his secret and his integrity, and had chosen his secret every time until the weight of that accumulated choosing had become the defining fact of his life. Cole read the dossier's final section last, the section about Danny Gallagher, 6 years old, Fresno group home, 1 year after Hank's staged death on Interstate 5 in the 12 months when Stone Gallagher was serving time and had no ability to reach his son and had trusted the system to do what systems are supposed to do for the children in their care. Negligence with specific intent documented through 3 independent sources that had no knowledge of each other and therefore no ability to have coordinated their accounts. The name of the facility director at the time, the name of the network contact who had communicated the instruction, the documentation trail that connected both of them to the infrastructure that had protected Weston for years before Danny was born and continued protecting him for years after. Cole read that section and sat with it for a long time without speaking. Then he turned and looked at Stone, who was standing 3 feet away. He held out the dossier open to that section, and Stone took it and read it, and Cole watched Stone's face do the thing that Stone's face very rarely did, which was to let something show that was not managed. Not completely. Something moved through the controlled landscape of Stone Gallagher's expression, like weather through a landscape that had been still for a long time, brief and total, and then absorbed, replaced by the particular stillness of a man who has arrived at the end of something he has been moving toward for a long time and who is not yet ready to name what arriving there feels like. He stood with the open dossier in his hands for a long time. Nobody spoke. Nobody moved toward him. The 57 men who were witnesses to this moment understood without being told that this was not a moment that required their words or their presence at close range. They held their positions and they let Stone Gallagher stand with what he was holding, and they extended to him the particular grace of people who know what it costs to receive a truth that should have arrived 6 years ago and did not. Cole watched him. After a while, Stone closed the dossier carefully and held it at his side and looked at the South Dakota sky above the lot, and then looked at Cole, and Cole looked back at him, and between them in that exchange was everything that needed to be said, and none of it required words. The 57 member of the Iron Wolves read the dossier in relay over the following 2 hours, passing sections hand to hand through the August heat. The sound that the reading produced was not anger exactly, though anger was present in it, the way heat is present in a room that has been closed too long everywhere and inescapable. It was something more complicated than anger. The sound of a community processing a betrayal that had roots deep enough to implicate not just the people named in the document, but the conditions that had allowed the betrayal to grow and remain hidden for as long as it had. The dossier went to 3 private attorneys retained by the club's legal defense network before the sun began its descent toward the Black Hills. Copies were transmitted simultaneously to investigative journalists at the Dallas Morning News and the Sacramento Bee, 2 reporters who had been working federal corruption cases independently for years and who received the documentation through channels that could not be traced back to the east lot of the Full Throttle Saloon. Hank had identified both reporters in his investigation and had noted their specific credibility and their independence from the networks connected to Weston's protection. Within 48 hours, Special Agent Craig Weston was placed on administrative leave pending investigation. He made 2 phone calls and sent 1 encrypted message in the window between his suspension and the revocation of his communications access. 3 of the people connected to those communications became witnesses for the prosecution within 30 days, because federal protection is only as durable as the authority behind it, and the moment that authority begins to erode, the loyalty it purchased evaporates at a rate proportional to the speed of the erosion. Duke Rafferty walked into the Meade County Sheriff's Office on a Friday morning and provided a complete statement. He sat in that chair for 4 hours and he left nothing out. His attorney was present throughout. His cooperation was total and documented and would matter when the accounting came. What the club decided about Duke Rafferty was decided in a room that no record was kept of by the people whose decision it was to make, and the outcome of that decision was never disclosed to anyone outside that room. Some things belong to the Brotherhood and to no other jurisdiction. Stone sat beside Cole in room 412 of Rapid City Regional on the last night before Cole was cleared for discharge. The room was quiet. Daisy had finally been persuaded to sleep in an actual bed at the motel 2 hours earlier, extracted from the recliner by Reed Flynn, with the careful and patient diplomacy of a man negotiating with a 9-year-old who had made her position on the subject completely clear and required significant convincing to revise it. The discharge bracelet was still on Cole's right wrist. The book was on the blanket beside him. Stone sat with his forearms on his knees and looked at the middle distance for a while before he spoke. He said, "Your father trusted me with something a long time ago. He asked me to trust back, and I did, and then I thought I had lost the chance to honor either one of those things." He looked at Cole. He said, "I am not going to lose it again. There is a room in Sonoma. It has been a storage room for 6 years, and it should not be a storage room. I'm going to clear it out when we get back." Cole was quiet for a moment. Outside the window, the South Dakota night pressed against the glass with the particular density of the high plains, dark, enormous, and full of stars, and indifferent in the specific way that enormous things are indifferent. Not hostile, simply operating at a scale where individual human arrangements do not register. Cole said, "He said you would say something like that." Stone looked at the window. Cole said, "He said you would offer the room and pretend it was not a significant thing. He said that was how you did everything important, like it was nothing, so that the other person did not feel the weight of receiving it." Stone did not say anything for a while. Cole said, "He also said that you would probably need someone to tell you that it is allowed to be a significant thing, that not everything important has to be carried like it weighs nothing. He said you had been carrying things like they weighed nothing for so long that you had stopped being able to let anyone see the actual weight." Stone looked at him. The boy in the bed, 14 years old, left shoulder bandage, 3 stitches in his chin, discharge bracelet on his right wrist. The book from Desert Sun Group home on the blanket beside him, worn and cracked and coverless and entirely intact. Cole said, "He told me about Danny. He told me in the 7th month." Stone said nothing. Cole said, "He said you had a son. He said that was why you would understand when the time came. Not the situation," he said, "but the specific quality of what it feels like to have the person who was supposed to protect someone not be there. He said you had lived with that and that it had not made you smaller. He said it had made you more careful about the things worth protecting." Stone looked at the window for a long time. Then he said, "He always read people more accurately than was comfortable." Cole said present tense. Stone said present tense. After a while, Cole said Stone. Stone looked at him. Cole said, "Thank you for coming back from Phoenix, for not deciding that the cost of what was on that card was more than you were willing to pay." He paused. Some people, when they find out what something is really going to cost them, decide the original price was more reasonable and ask for their money back. Stone said, "Your father stood at my kitchen table once a long time ago at 2 in the morning. He said the difference between a man who can be trusted and a man who cannot is not character. He said character is something every man believes he has. He said the difference is whether a man stays in the room when the room gets expensive." Cole said, "He told me that too, in the 8th month." Stone said, "Then you also know what he said next." Cole said, "He said the room is always more expensive than you budgeted for. He said that is not a reason to leave. He said that is the entire point. That is how you know the room is the right one." Stone nodded once. He stood up. He looked at Cole Briggs in the dim light of room 412, and what he saw in the boy's face was something he recognized from a long time ago, from a place inside himself, that had been quiet for 6 years since the Fresno grave and which had apparently not been extinguished after all, only waiting. He said, "Get some rest. We leave for Sonoma in the morning." He walked to the door. Cole said, "Stone." The man stopped with his hand on the doorframe. Cole said, "He was right to trust you. I know you know that. But I wanted to say it out loud in a room to your face, because he could not and someone should." Stone stood in the doorway without turning around for the length of 3 slow breaths. Then he walked out into the corridor, and the door swung closed behind him, and Cole Briggs lay in the bed in the dimmed room and looked at the ceiling and felt something settle through him like sediment through water, finding the bottom becoming still. He picked up the book. He held it against his chest. He closed his eyes. The room in Sonoma that had been a storage room for 6 years had a desk in it now, and a chair and a window that faced east, and a door with a lock on the inside that was new enough that the hardware still smelled faintly of the packaging. Stone had installed the lock himself 2 days before Cole arrived, without mentioning that he had done it or what it was for. Cole found it on his first night in the room, tested it twice, and did not test it again, which was itself a form of information that Stone received and filed without comment. The first week in Sonoma was quiet in the way that new things are quiet, full of the particular attention that unfamiliar arrangements require before they become familiar. Cole went to school on the 4th day carrying a backpack that Daisy had helped him choose at a store in the town center, selecting it with the focused deliberation of someone who understood that the choice mattered and intended to get it right. She had opinions about the color. Cole deferred to them. The backpack was dark green. He came home on the afternoon of the first day and stood in the kitchen and said nothing for a moment, and then said, "It is different than I expected." Stone said, "Different how?" Cole said, "Quieter. I expected it to be louder." Stone said, "Give it time." Cole said, "That is not a complaint." Stone said, "I know." Hank did not come to Sonoma. Cole had known he would not, or not yet, and had not said so directly because it was the kind of knowing that benefits from not being named until the person who needs to name it is ready to do so. Stone knew too, in the way that men who have been reading Hank Mercer for 20 years know things about him, which is to say through the particular configuration of what he had said and what he had deliberately not said in the phone call from Phoenix and in the East Lot, and in the brief conversation they had managed before Hank rode out of the full-throttle lot on the matte black Sportster and disappeared into the South Dakota afternoon. The dossier had removed Weston from the board. The grand jury in Sacramento was proceeding. The network of connections that had protected Weston for years was unraveling at the rate that network will unravel when the central node is compromised and the people connected to it begin calculating the distance between loyalty and self-preservation. But Hank had said on the phone from Phoenix that Weston was the middle of the chain, not the top. The person above Weston was still protected, still unnamed in any document that had yet surfaced, still operating behind the infrastructure that had kept them invisible through 7 years of everything Hank had built and deployed and sacrificed to bring the situation to the place it had reached. The dossier was not complete. Hank had known that when he handed it to Cole. He had built it to be enough to move against Weston and enough to protect the club from what was coming, and it was both of those things. But it was not the full truth, and Hank Mercer had spent 7 years in the dark, specifically because he was not a man who stopped before the full truth was in his hands. On the morning that Cole started his first semester at school in Sonoma, Stone was standing in the kitchen with a cup of coffee going cold on the counter and his phone in his other hand, and the particular expression on his face of a man reading something twice to be certain he has read it correctly the first time. Cole came downstairs at 7:15. He could hear Daisy through the back screen door explaining something at length to the neighbor's dog, which listened with the patient attention of an animal that has committed fully to the engagement. The kitchen smelled like coffee and the particular morning smell of a house that is lived in, layered and specific, entirely unlike the institutional smell of Desert Sun Group home or any of the other places Cole had slept in the past 3 years. Stone held out the phone without a word. Cole took it. He looked at the screen. 3 words from a Nevada area code that was not in Stone's contacts, from a burner phone somewhere in the high desert of eastern Nevada, where a 1987 Harley-Davidson Sportster, matte black, was moving at the deliberate and unhurried pace of a man who had learned over 7 years of careful and patient and invisible work that speed is less useful than precision, and that precision requires the time to see clearly. One more name. Cole read the message. He read it twice. He handed the phone back to Stone. He looked at the counter for a moment, at the cold cup of coffee, at the morning light coming through the kitchen window, at the angle that morning light comes through east-facing windows, warm and specific, touching the edges of things without demanding attention. He said he is not finished. Stone said no. Cole said, "Are you going?" Stone looked at the message on the phone for a long moment. He looked at Cole. He looked through the screen door to where Daisy was now demonstrating something with her hands, the dog tracking her movements with the focused interest of an animal that has no idea what the demonstration means, but has decided the person doing it is worth watching. He set the phone on the counter. He picked up the cold coffee and poured it into the sink. He walked past Cole toward the back of the house where the garage door was, and Cole heard his footsteps through the kitchen and into the small hallway, and then the sound of the garage door. The engine turned over on the first try. Cole stood in the kitchen and listened to it idle, that specific low register of a machine built for distance, warming up, finding its rhythm, settling into the patient and particular sound of something that knows what it was made for and is ready for whatever road it meets next. Daisy came in from the back porch and stood beside Cole, and they listened together through the kitchen wall as the engine note changed, as Stone backed the bike out of the garage and into the Sonoma morning. Daisy said, "He is going to find him." Cole said, "Yes." Daisy said, "And then they will come back." Cole looked at her. She said it the way 9-year-olds say things they have decided are true, with the uncomplicated certainty of someone who has not yet learned to budget for the possibility of being wrong about the things that matter most, and who may in fact be better served by that particular quality than any of the adults around her currently understood. Cole said yes. The engine note changed as Stone pulled onto the street, finding the gears settling into the pace of a man riding towards something that was not finished and that he had promised at a kitchen table 7 years ago, and again in the silence of a motel room in Phoenix, and again in the doorway of room 412 at Rapid City Regional, that he would see through to its completion regardless of what completion required. The sound carried through the morning air of the Sonoma neighborhood, past the houses with their sprinklers and their newspapers and their ordinary weekday morning arrangements, and then it faded, moving toward the highway, moving toward the distance, moving toward whatever Hank Mercer had not yet finished, because that was what you did when a man had trusted you at a kitchen table and you had given your word and the word was not yet complete. That was what brotherhood meant when it meant something real. That was what it had always meant. Cole stood in the kitchen with the east light on his face and Daisy beside him, and the sound of the engine already gone and already replaced by the ordinary sounds of the Sonoma morning, the neighbor's sprinkler, a car on the street 2 blocks over, the dog resuming its negotiation with the screen door. He looked at the book on the kitchen counter where he had left it the night before. He picked it up. He turned it over in his hands, the cracked spine and the soft pages in the absence of a cover that he had stopped registering as an absence long before Sturgis. It was simply the shape of the book now, its specific and unrepeatable form. He had carried it from Phoenix to Flagstaff in the rain, and from Flagstaff to Sturgis in the waistband of his jeans, and across 22 feet of open gravel, and through the floor of a South Dakota parking lot, and back to Sonoma, California. And it had done what it was built to do and delivered everything it was built to deliver. He set it back on the counter. He was not going to need it for what it had been carrying. That work was done. He looked at the east light coming through the window. He looked at the door to the garage, still standing open, the Sonoma morning moving through it warm and carrying the particular smell of the rosemary someone had planted along the fence line at the edge of the yard, which was the kind of detail that only registers when you have been in a place long enough for its specific character to begin to belong to you. He looked at Daisy, who had already moved on to the next thing, to the boom and the screen door. In the ordinary and inexhaustible business of being 9 years old on a school day morning, in a house with a yard and a kitchen and a window that faced east. Cole Briggs stood in the kitchen in Sonoma, California, on the morning of the first day of the rest of his life, and he let the morning be what it was. Which was the morning? Which was this kitchen and this light and this particular smell of rosemary and coffee and the sound of a dog through a screen door? Which was enough? Which was more than enough? Which was when he stood inside it fully and let it land without compressing it into anything smaller than itself everything. The green backpack was by the front door. He had put it there last night so he would not forget it. He picked it up on his way through the hallway, and he opened the front door, and he stepped out into the Sonoma morning, and the morning received him the way mornings receive people who have earned the right to walk into them without looking over their shoulder. He walked toward school. Behind him in the kitchen, Eastlight moved across the counter and found the book and held it there for a moment, the cracked spine and the soft pages, and then moved on. The way. Light always moves on, finding the next thing and the next, indifferent and continuous and entirely indifferent to what any particular thing has been or carried or cost. Somewhere in the high desert of eastern Nevada, a matte black Sportster was moving at the deliberate pace of a man with one more name to find and the 7 years of patience required to find it correctly. And somewhere on the road between Sonoma and whatever Hank had not yet finished, Stone Gallagher was riding toward the place where a promise kept is simply the place where you stop. And in the east lot of the Full Throttle Saloon in Sturgis, South Dakota, the August sun had long since moved on from the asphalt where 57 men had knelt, and the gravel had returned to its ordinary indifference. And somewhere in that gravel, scattered and unretrievable, were 43 cents that had been in the pocket of a 14-year-old boy on the morning he decided to spend everything he had. It had been enough. It had always been exactly enough. The grand jury in Sacramento convened 6 weeks after the dossier reached the attorneys and the journalists, which was faster than anyone who understood how grand juries worked had expected. The speed was a function of the quality of Hank's documentation, which was the quality of 7 years of a man with nothing but time and purpose and the particular discipline of someone who understood that the evidence had to be so complete and so well organized that the people receiving it could not find a reason to set it aside. Hank had not built a case. He had built a structure that left no room for the case not to be made. The attorneys who received the dossier contacted Stone through channels that kept the connection invisible and told him in terms that were precise without being specific that what they were holding was among the most thoroughly documented records of sustained federal misconduct they had encountered in a combined practice of 60 years. One of them, a woman named Harriet, who had spent 15 years working federal corruption cases before going into private practice, said that the handwritten reconstructions alone represented a level of analytical rigor that would be credible in any jurisdiction she had ever worked in. She said this without apparent awareness of the irony of praising the analytical rigor of a man who had been officially dead for 7 years. Stone relayed none of this to Cole directly. He told Cole that the attorneys were satisfied with the documentation and that things were moving. Cole had said he would have been pleased that it was moving fast. Stone had said he would have been pleased that it was moving correctly. Cole had thought about this and said, those are the same thing for him. Stone had considered it and said, yes, I suppose they are. The Sacramento Bee published first 11 days after receiving the documentation. The piece was careful and precisely worded the language of journalists who understand that what they are publishing will be contested and who have therefore stripped from it everything that could be contested and left only what cannot be. It named Weston. It named the accident on Highway 99. It named the date and the location and the age of the victim and the evidence of Weston's presence in the 7-year pattern of document management that had followed. It did not speculate. It did not editorialize. It stated what the documentation showed and provided the documentation in a supplementary file accessible online and let the documentation speak for what it was. The Dallas Morning News published the following morning with additional context about the network of connections Weston had used to protect himself, the connections between the FBI Sacramento field office and the political infrastructure that had kept the network intact, and the specific mechanisms by which Rafferty had been recruited into the arrangement. The Dallas piece was careful in a different way from the Sacramento piece. Careful in the way of journalists who understand that what they are publishing will hurt people who deserve to be hurt, and also people who do not, and who are trying to draw that line as precisely as the available information allows. Rafferty's section of the Dallas piece was written with the kind of specificity that could only have come from Rafferty's own statement to the Meade County Sheriff. It named the event from Rafferty's past that Weston had used as leverage. It named the year. It named how long Rafferty had been carrying it. It did not editorialize about whether what Rafferty had done was forgivable. It presented what he had done and what had been done to him and left the arithmetic to the reader. Cole read both pieces at the kitchen table in Sonoma on a Wednesday morning before school. He read them the way Hank had taught him to read things slowly and more than once, looking for what was said and what was not said, and what the gap between those two things implied. When he had read both pieces twice, he set the tablet on the table and looked at the east light coming through the kitchen window for a moment. Then he picked up his backpack and went to school. He did not talk about the pieces at school. He did not talk about Sturgis at school. He did not talk about the discharge bracelet, which he had kept for 2 weeks after it was no longer medically necessary, and which he had eventually put in the desk drawer in the room that had been a storage room, not as a reminder exactly, more as a marker of a specific point in time that it seemed important to be able to locate. He went to school and came home from school and did his work at the desk with the east-facing window and ate dinner with Stone and Daisy and learned the specific rhythms of the Sonoma house, the way you learn the rhythms of any place you are going to live in, which is by living in it and paying attention. Daisy taught him things about the house that Stone had not mentioned. She told him which window in the upstairs hallway stuck in humid weather and had to be pushed from the bottom corner rather than the center of the frame. She told him that the neighbor's dog, whose name was apparently Gerald, despite looking like nothing that should be named Gerald, responded better to being spoken to in a low voice than a regular voice, and that this was a fact she had established through systematic experimentation over several months. She told him that Stone kept the good coffee in the cabinet above the refrigerator and the acceptable coffee in the cabinet next to the sink, and that the distinction mattered more to Stone than he would ever acknowledge directly. Cole stored all of this information with the same care he had stored everything Hank had told him, which was the care of someone who understands that what seems small is often not small, and that the difference between knowing a place and being in a place is the accumulation of exactly these kinds of specific and unrepeatable details. He was being in the place. He was learning it from the inside. This was new. He had been in many places in 14 years. He had never been in a place from the inside before. The distinction was not one he had a clear language for, but he felt it in the specific way that important things are felt before they are understood, as a quality of the air in a room, as a difference in the weight of the mornings. The mornings in Sonoma had a different weight than the mornings anywhere else Cole had been. He could not have said why exactly. The light was part of it, the east-facing window of his room, receiving the morning in a way that was generous without being demanding, present without insisting on itself. The sounds were part of it, the ordinary sounds of a neighborhood going about its business, the specific and reassuring ordinariness of people who had somewhere to be and were going there. The smell was part of it, the rosemary along the fence line and the coffee from the kitchen, and the particular smell of a house that has been lived in long enough to have its own character. But it was more than any of those things individually. It was the combination of them into something that could only exist if you were inside it, rather than passing through it if you had been there long enough for the specific configuration of all those details to have become familiar without having become invisible. Cole was learning what familiar felt like. He was learning it on purpose, paying attention to it the way he paid attention to everything Hank had taught him to pay attention to, which was to say completely and without filtering out the parts that did not seem immediately relevant, because Hank had told him that what does not seem immediately relevant is often what matters most when the situation changes. He was also learning what Daisy was like. This was a different kind of education from any other kind Cole had received. Daisy was 9 years old and operated on a set of principles that were internally consistent and thoroughly her own, and which bore a relationship to the principles that other people operated on that was approximate rather than exact. She was curious about everything and persistent in her curiosity to a degree that was occasionally exhausting and always impressive. She had opinions about most things and was willing to revise them when presented with compelling evidence and unwilling to revise them when presented with anything less, which Cole found both maddening and admirable in roughly equal measure. She had decided within the first 3 days that Cole was someone worth knowing. She had communicated this decision through a series of small actions that were clearly deliberate, without being performed: the leaving of a book she thought he might like on the desk in his room, the including of him in conversations she had with herself and with Gerald, the neighbor's dog, and with the general universe, about topics of interest, the asking of questions that were not small talk, but actual questions. Questions she wanted actual answers to. She asked him what Phoenix was like. She asked him what his favorite book was besides the one she already knew about. She asked him what he thought about Nevada, which was a question that surprised him enough that he asked what she meant. And she said she had been looking at maps and Nevada was very large, and she wanted to know if he had a theory about what it was for. He said he did not have a complete theory, but that he suspected it was primarily for driving through. She had considered this seriously and said that was probably right, but that it seemed like a lot of space for a single purpose. He had said that some purposes need a lot of space. She had thought about this for a while and then said that was probably true also. These conversations happened in the kitchen and in the yard and on the way to and from school, which Daisy attended at the same building as Cole, on account of the building containing grades 3 through 12 in the specific way of smaller California school districts. She walked part of the way with him every morning, talking continuously about whatever was currently occupying the top of her attention, which changed from day to day, but was always addressed with the same quality of focused engagement, regardless of what it was. Cole listened. He had always been good at listening. Hank had said that listening was the most underrated skill a person could have, and that most people were bad at it because they were spending the time when the other person was talking, organizing what they were going to say next, rather than actually receiving what was being said. Cole had been a good listener before Hank told him this. Afterward, he was a more conscious one. He listened to Daisy talk about her theories and her observations and her questions and her running assessments of the people and situations she encountered, and he found that listening to her was a different experience from listening to most people, which was that she was always actually saying something. Even the things that seemed like small talk on the surface had something underneath them if you were paying attention. Some question she was working through, or some position she was testing against a new piece of information, or some connection she was making between two things that did not obviously belong together. Cole realized within the first week doing the same thing he did, which was paying attention to everything and trying to understand the relationship between the things she was paying attention to. She was 9 years old and she was doing it with the natural, unself-conscious ease of someone who had been doing it for her entire life, because the person who had been her primary example was also doing it all the time without making a production of it. She was Stone's daughter. This was visible in her the way certain things are visible in children who have been closely raised by one parent, not as imitation, but as inheritance, the disposition rather than the behavior. She had Stone's quality of being simply and completely present in wherever she was. She had his capacity for silence that was not absence. She had his tendency to make decisions that were already complete by the time they were communicated. The decision having been made internally in whatever process she used to make decisions and then stated as a fact rather than proposed as a possibility. What she did not have, or what she had in a different form, was Stone's habitual minimizing of the weight of things. She had not learned to carry things like they weighed nothing. She had learned to carry things which was different. She knew that things were heavy when they were heavy, and she said so directly and without apology, and she put them down when she was done with them, which was also something Cole was learning to observe and to consider whether it was a thing he could learn to do. He was not sure yet. He had been carrying things like they weighed nothing for a long time, which was the habit you develop when the alternative was letting people see the weight and having them use that visibility against you. In Sonoma, in this house with these people, the alternative did not seem to carry the same risk. But 14 years of a habit is not 3 weeks of a different situation. And Cole was practical enough to understand that understanding this intellectually and having it change the habit were two separate things on a timeline he could not control. He was trying. This seemed like enough for now. Stone called from Nevada on the third day after he left. The call was short, as Stone's calls tended to be containing exactly the information it needed to contain and nothing additional. He said he had found the location. He said Hank was close to finishing. He said he would be back within the week. Cole said, "Is Hank all right?" Stone said, "He is Hank." Cole considered this. He said, "That is not an answer." Stone said, "It is the most accurate answer I have." Cole said, "Okay." Stone said, "How is Daisy?" Cole said, "She has a theory about Nevada." A pause, then Stone said, "What is the theory?" Cole said, "She thinks it is primarily for driving through, but that the amount of space seems like a lot for a single purpose." Another pause longer, then Stone said, "That sounds right." He said it with the quality of a man who has just recognized something in a description that he had not articulated to himself before, but which he immediately understands to be accurate. Cole said, "She also made eggs this morning." Stone said, "How were they?" Cole said, "Better than they should have been." Stone said, "That also sounds right." He said he would call again when there was more to tell. He ended the call in the efficient way he ended all calls, which was by saying what needed to be said and then stopping. Cole set the phone on the kitchen counter and stood in the kitchen for a moment in the east morning light and thought about a man he had never met except through 7 years of careful preparation and 11 months of Tuesdays and Thursdays, riding through the Nevada desert toward the last piece of something he had been building for a long time. He thought about what it cost to build something that long and that carefully in the dark without being able to tell anyone what you were building or why, without the normal human supports that people rely on when they are doing difficult things, the acknowledgement and the companionship and the simple fact of being known by the people around you. He thought about what it required to sustain that work for 7 years while the people you were building it for were living their lives without knowing you were building anything, while Stone was carrying a grief that was real, even though its object was not gone, while Daisy was growing up in the specific way of children who grow up without the particular parent who is absent. He thought about what it meant that Hank had made that choice and sustained it without flinching for 7 years. He thought about what it meant that he was the choice Hank had made for the final piece of it, the 14-year-old boy in the Phoenix group home, who had been Cole Brigg and nothing else, and who now had a name on a casket in Bakersfield as the other half of his inheritance, in a room in Sonoma with a window that faced east as the current half. He thought these things standing in the kitchen in the east morning light, and then he picked up his backpack and went to school, because some things you think and then you live with what you have thought, and the living is the next part of what thinking is for. Hank Mercer returned to Sonoma on a Thursday evening in late September, 7 weeks after Sturgis riding the matte black Sportster up the street in the particular low-gear way of someone who has covered a significant distance and is deliberately slowing down for the arrival rather than simply arriving. Cole heard the engine from the kitchen and knew what it was before Stone came in from the garage, where he had been the moment the sound reached the neighborhood. The two of them having developed in the weeks since Sturgis an unspoken arrangement in which neither acknowledged the specific frequency of attention they were paying to the sound of approaching motorcycles. Stone went to the front door. Cole stayed in the kitchen. Daisy was upstairs doing homework, or performing the appearance of doing homework, while actually reading something unrelated to homework, which was the arrangement she had arrived at with the concept of homework in general. Cole stood at the kitchen counter and listened to the front door open, and the particular quality of the silence that followed it, which was not the silence of absence, but the silence of two people in a doorway who have not seen each other in a context where seeing each other is real rather than impossible for a combined total of 7 years, and who are therefore engaged in a form of communication that does not require or benefit from words. He let them have the doorway. He was looking at the window above the sink, the west-facing window that caught the late afternoon light differently from his east-facing bedroom window, catching it at a lower angle, and with a warmer color, the specific gold of California September evenings that he had not known before Sonoma, and was now learning the way he was learning everything about this place from the inside and with full attention. He heard the front door close. He heard footsteps in the hallway. He heard Stone say something quietly, and Hank respond in the low and unhurried register that Cole knew better than any other voice he had ever heard. Knew it the way you know the voice that taught you how to pay attention to voices, which is to say, from the inside, from the place where listening and understanding are the same action. Then Hank was in the kitchen doorway. Cole turned around. Hank looked older in the kitchen light than he had looked in the South Dakota afternoon of the Full Throttle lot. The Nevada weeks had added something to the weathering, or perhaps it was simply that the kitchen light was more honest than the rally afternoon had been showing things that the August sun at distance had not caught. The gray at his temples, the particular lines around his eyes, the specific quality of a man who has been carrying something heavy for a long time and has just very recently set it down, and whose body is still adjusting to the absence of the weight. He looked at Cole. Cole looked at him. Between them in the kitchen, in the west afternoon light, was 11 months of Tuesdays and Thursdays, and everything those months had contained, and everything they had been in preparation for, in the 22 feet of South Dakota gravel, and the shoulder, and the 3 stitches, and the 43 cents, and the book and the index card, and the dossier, and the Nevada weeks, and the name that had finally been found, and the thing that being found meant for the shape of what came next. All of it was in the room. Neither of them named any of it. Hank said the eggs. Cole looked at him. Hank said, Stone tells me Daisy has been making eggs. Cole said yes. Hank said, how are they? Cole said better than they should be. Hank nodded once with the expression of a man receiving information that confirmed something he already understood to be true. He pulled out the chair across from where Cole had been standing and sat down at the kitchen table in the particular way of someone who is sitting down in a place they intend to remain in for a while, settling into it rather than perching on the edge of it. He said, "Sit down, I want to hear about school." Cole sat down. He told Hank about school. He told him about the teachers in the building and the way the light came in through the classroom windows in the afternoon, and about a boy in his grade named Marcus who had approached him on the third day with the direct and uncomplicated friendliness of someone who had not yet learned to make friendship complicated and who seemed to have decided that Cole was a worthwhile investment before Cole had done anything to demonstrate whether this assessment was accurate. He told Hank about the books he had been reading from the library that was attached to the school proper books with covers, which he was still adjusting to. He told Hank about Daisy's theories, the Nevada theory and the Gerald theory, and the theory about the upstairs hallway window. Hank listened. He listened the way he had always listened, completely, and without the filtering that most people applied, receiving what was being said rather than preparing what to say next. It was the same quality of listening that Cole had been trying to learn for 11 months, and that he was still learning, that he would probably always be learning because it was the kind of thing that a person could spend a lifetime refining without exhausting the refinement available. When Cole had finished, Hank said, "Good." Cole said, "Which part?" Hank said, "All of it." He paused. "All of it is good, Cole." Cole looked at the table for a moment. Then he looked at Hank. He said, "Is it finished?" Hank said, "The name I found in Nevada will go to the attorneys next week. After that, the shape of the legal proceeding changes, and the people it needs to change for will not be in a position to prevent it changing." He paused. "It is not completely finished. These things are not finished quickly when they are done correctly. But the part that required what you carried is finished." Cole said, "The part that required me." Hank said, "Yes." Cole said, "And now?" Hank looked at him across the kitchen table in the Sonoma afternoon and said, "Now you go to school and come home and Daisy makes eggs and you learn what it is like to be in a place that is yours." He paused. "That is what now is for." Cole sat with that for a moment. Through the ceiling, they could hear Daisy moving around in her room, the particular rhythm of someone who has heard an arrival and is deciding at what pace to respond to it, fast enough to be genuine and not so fast as to sacrifice dignity. The neighbor's dog, Gerald, was audible through the back screen door. Cole said, "He said it would cost more than I budgeted for." Hank said, "It always does." Cole said he was right. Hank said, "He usually is." Cole said, "You both are. It is occasionally irritating." Something moved in Hank's face. Not quite a smile, but the thing that lives in the same territory as a smile, the specific warmth of a man who has been given something he did not expect to receive and who is letting himself receive it without deflecting it. He said, "Good. That means you are paying attention." Daisy came downstairs, then no longer at the pace of someone managing their response, at the pace of someone who had decided the managing was taking too long and had revised her approach accordingly. She appeared in the kitchen doorway and looked at Hank, and Hank looked at her, and Daisy said, "You came back." Hank said, "Yes." Daisy said, "Good." She pulled out the chair beside Cole and sat down with the settled confidence of someone joining a conversation they have a right to be part of. She looked at Hank. She said, "Do you want eggs?" Hank said, "Very much." Daisy stood up and went to the refrigerator, and Cole watched her move through the kitchen with the particular ease of someone in a place they belong to, and that belongs to them. And he thought about Hank saying that is what now is for, and he thought that now was in fact what it was for, and that what it was for was this exactly, this, the kitchen and the light and the eggs and the people in it and the ordinary, extraordinary fact of being in a place from the inside. The sun moved in the west-facing window the way it always moved, indifferent, continuous, finding the next thing. Stone came in from the hallway and sat at the table. The four of them were in the kitchen in Sonoma in the September evening, and Daisy made eggs, and they ate them, and they were as Cole had said, and as Hank had confirmed, and as Stone would have confirmed if asked, and as Daisy already knew better than they should have been. They were exactly right. They were enough.